Hello everyone, I am the Enforcer, and today we are here again, once again, with the Day 56 news and the previous 24 hours of the war in Ukraine. Before we start off tonight, I would like to make a little mention because I've noticed a lot of comments recently about the merchandise finally arriving to a lot of people's houses, like the mugs and the shirts and stuff, and a lot of people are saying that they're pretty good quality, and actually, we got the mugs and the shirts here at our house I think a few days before everyone else did, which was pretty neat. And I've got to say, I'm a very big fan of the quality. Everything that I've seen so far has turned out incredibly well. And so I've got to say, beyond it just supporting the channel, they look incredibly good in quality. So I'm very happy with that. I'm happy that Teespring so far has delivered on the quality side of things. And so if y'all would like to support the channel and get something out of it, make sure to go over to the merch store and check it out because it is some pretty cool stuff over there. So with that, we're now going to move on to the news for the night. Starting off, we've actually gotten some news in the northern area of the country, in the Chernihiv and Kyiv area. No fighting, just to make that clear. This isn't any kind of combat. This is just aftermath and damage from when the Northern Front existed. So we're going to cover all that in one group, and we're also going to cover the Moscow news today in that group as well. Then we're going to take 3 to 5 questions from the chat, and then we'll move on to the location unknowns, the Kharkiv area, and then we're going to also cover the Donbas in general as well, since there's only one bit of news in there today. All this will be covered in one large chunk. We'll then answer 3 to 5 questions before we move on to Mariupol. We'll then cover the Mariupol news, and then the news from the rest of the Southern Front, which will then wrap up this day's news, except for the news that occurred in Norway. That will also be in the Southern Front news as well. And so with that, we're now going to move on to the Northern Front, where today we've heard some more unfortunate news, of course, in Borodyanka, where another mass grave has been found. Apparently there was a 15-year-old in this mass grave as well. 9 civilians were found in total. It's very unfortunate to see that even a week or two after the Russians have withdrawn from this area, they're still finding masses of bodies buried in mass graves that the Russians killed, probably deliberately at this point. I hate to see it, but nonetheless, that's actually not really representative of the news we've got today. It's still incredibly good news, and also we've changed the video title format. So, a lot of people have been saying, the titles are kind of clickbaity, and I can kind of agree. They did look a little clickbaity, so we've changed them, and if people like them, we'll keep them, but if not, we're probably going to go back to the old format probably tomorrow. Anyways, moving on from that, we're going to move on into the Irpin area, where today we saw a 250-kilogram bomb was found near a military hospital in Irpin. So as you can see right here, as it shows in this video, the bomb is right there. That's a massive bomb, 250 kilograms.
Будуть її знешкоджувати на місці, транспортувати небезпечно її і будуть через 10 хвилин її знешкоджувати. Де тут рядом живуть люди, чи знаходиться хтось, ми будемо виводити.
But as you can see, 250-kilogram bomb kind of hidden there amongst these sandbags and the rubble. Kind of incredibly hard to see, actually, but nonetheless, a bomb defusal squad did deactivate that bomb today and removed it from the site. So the site is safe now, and it's good to know that there are some sharp eyes out there amongst the Ukrainians that saw that bomb laying amongst the rubble. And so with that, we're now going to move on to the next bit of news. I think this is incredibly good news and very fitting of the new of what's been happening inside of Ukraine. Also, another thing I'd like to note is that this P-30 bridge right here is the only bridge that was in this area, and Google Maps has actually been incredibly quick with updating the area around this bridge, because this bridge here, that was originally part of the P-30, was wiped out. It was bombed, well, actually it was deliberately destroyed by the Ukrainians to slow the Russian advance in that area very early on in the war. And so just recently, the Ukrainians actually built a quick I don't really know what you'd like to call a makeshift bridge right beside the original one that was made out of gravel and some concrete pipes and such things like that. And so Google Maps has actually updated the map in this area to show that bridge is there. So that's incredibly interesting. But nonetheless, we've gotten some news that the largest war memorial will be planned to be built somewhere around this destroyed bridge. So I'm just going to show you all the video. As you can see here, the fighting in this area, of course, has subsided. So with that in mind, we can see that the destroyed bridge has a whole bunch of Ukrainian flags on it, and something like 40,000 people were evacuated over the ruined remains of this bridge, which is incredibly impressive when you think about the actual number of people that is. That's the size of a small city here in the United States that all had to walk through the ruins of this bridge. And so a war memorial is actually planned to be built here sometime during the war or most likely after it.
Приїжджали до нас високоповажні гості, був наш
So now we can see
президент,
an interview
і
being
було
conducted.
попередньо прийнято рішення, що зробити меморіал. Я скажу так, що це, в принципі, дуже правильне рішення. Чого? Бо це ми називали цю дорогу життя, бо це через цей міст ми евакуювали 40 тисяч мешканців наших.
Цей правий міст, на якому ми зараз стоїмо, він новий, і там під нові балки. Ми його фактично можемо відновити за 2 місяці.
Вот этот где разрушенный полностью мост, 2 полосы. Мы забываем про него.
Now we can see another interview being held. I'm not really sure if this one is about the war memorial itself or just the location of the bridge.
Он озвучил, оставляется полностью. Через цей міст ми вивозили ранених, ми вивозили лежачих хворих і навпаки, назад, в зворотній бік ми завозили військових, військові підрозділи завозили їжу, завозили ліки і завозили БК і зброю, звичайно. То це, я впевнений, буде один із самих таких крутих, грандіозних меморіальних пам'яток цієї війни.
So with that, that's the end of that video. We do know that the war memorial will be built there, but I'm not really sure what they're planning on doing first. I feel like their priority in that area would be to rebuild the bridge, considering that it was a bridge on the P30 highway, which is one of the major roads leading into Irpin from Kyiv. So I think they'll probably work on rebuilding the bridge first, and then they'll build the memorial somewhere around it, most likely in the adjacent field that we see very often in the video. And so with that, we're now going to move on from the Bucha Hostomel Irpin area into the city of Kyiv itself, where today we've seen that the Oblon Fire Department has received 8 German fire engines. Once again, an incredibly generous donation from the Germans. As we can see here they all are inside of Obolon, which is very good to see, and it's good to know that the Germans are trying to provide a decent amount of equipment, even the equipment that's not really thought about, like civilian trucks and firefighters and such things like that. So, got to say, thank you very much to Germany for doing that for them. It is, once again, a huge help. And with that, we're now going to move on from Kyiv to Chernihiv, where today we've actually seen some drone footage taken of the absolute damage that has been wrought on this city. It's something crazy to see, really, when you look at it, because it's terrible. It looks a lot like Mariupol. Anyways, I'm not going to talk too much about it. Unfortunately, I do have to mute the video because it's got copyrighted music, but nonetheless, here is the drone footage. And as you can see, buildings are just destroyed everywhere. In this area, though, it actually looks somewhat decently intact, but around the rest of the city, you can see that there's just damage all over. I would say that this is very similar to Mariupol or Severodonetsk or any of the cities down on the front lines in the east and south. It is just terrible. So with that, that's the end of that video. Once again, I have to say that the amount of damage that we've seen across the country, all over, even in the areas now that the Russians have left, is incredibly large, and terrible to think that people are living in those kinds of situations. So with that, that's really all there is to say about that. It's kind of something that we've seen for quite a long time now. And so with that, we're now going to move on from the northern front to the location unknowns, where we've gotten a decent amount of interesting news today. So let's take a look at that. First off, we've seen that a drone has destroyed a Russian tank again. This, of course, appears to be one of the improvised drones, I'm believing, which is dropping some kind of improvised bomblets. But nonetheless, in this video here, we can see the bomblet dropping down onto the T-72B3, and then the screen goes black because the tweet was deleted. So I'm actually going to have to show from here so that way it doesn't black the thing out. But anyways, here it is again. I'm actually going to rewind it so that way you can see it. So you can see the bomblet was dropped straight onto the top of the turret. The bomblet then exploded, and it has wiped out the T-72B3, and the tank now appears to be brewing up, perhaps. Actually, it looks like there's a crewman. Yeah, they're bailing out of the tank. Very interesting. It doesn't look like the tank was wiped out immediately. It looks like the crew actually had enough time to bail out because we saw both the commander and the gunner, which a T-72 only has a crew of 3, get out of the turret and actually bail out and survive. So that was it kind of seems like the Ukrainians were doing a little bit of a knocking thing, like knocking on top of the turret with that little bomb, like, hey, we're going to destroy it, y'all might want to crawl out. And they actually got out, and it looks like they have escaped the clutches of death today, but their tank did not. So with that, incredibly interesting to see. And so we're now going to move on to the next bit of Location Unknown News, where we can see the Russians conduct a night raid. There's not really much to say about this. It's really just some what appears to be infrared footage, and so I'm going to let y'all see this in its entirety. And so, unfortunately, the footage is kind of vague. You really can't tell a lot from it. But nonetheless, this was posted by some Russian Ministry Defense group. And so it is interesting to see that they are trying to upload some kind of footage that does show the Russians in a positive light, at least. We do know, of course, the Russian propaganda ministries are going to try their best to ensure that the only news and footage that gets out is stuff that looks good for them. So with that, we're now going to move on to the next video, next bit of Location Unknown News, where we see Ukrainian artillery hitting a Russian column. This is an incredibly interesting video, as you can see that this column is large in the initial opening part of this video. So you can see here all the vehicles. It looks like it's a decent hodgepodge. That may be an OSA. We can see also a BTR-60 there. I'm not really sure what these vehicles are up the front, but nonetheless, it is a large amount of armor on this one road. So now we can see that they've moved into this village, and Ukrainian artillery appears to be harassing them as they move from out of the village and into the surrounding fields, it seems. So we can see that a decent amount of vehicles were actually destroyed. Not the entire convoy, of course. That's actually very hard to accomplish most times, as we can see in videos. But they did destroy a decent amount of the armor in it, which will, of course, cause them some issues later on down the road. Like, for example, if there were any crews that did survive out of those vehicles, how are they transported now, considering the other vehicles may also be at full capacity? That's an incredibly good question that I hope we can get an answer to someday. But anyways, we're now going to move on from that to the next video, the next bit of Location Unknown News, where we can see that our TikTok stars have apparently been having some bloopers and sploofs, if you know what I mean. In this video, we can actually see them firing at the Ukrainians in the distance, and it looks like they got hit directly with an RPG. It's not graphic footage, so I can actually show it on YouTube. Oh, I forgot. It's got copyrighted music. And so you can see there, the RPG hit right near them. And we can't really see much beyond that, but that was pretty much a direct hit by whatever kind of RPG shell that was on those groups of Chechens. So we can see that the Tick Stars are kind of running out of luck now. Even in their own videos, they're starting to show that they're taking a lot of incoming fire, a lot of wounded and dead. We've seen that over the past 2 days, and it's starting to show a little bit of a change in how the Chechens are fighting this war in a way. So with that, we're now going to move on to the next bit of location unknown news, where we can see that the Ukrainians have once again captured another T-72. This time it's not the pride of the Russian T-72 fleet, the T-72B3. It's just a standard T-72B with a normal contact ERA tiles. So here's this video. I'm going to unmute this and put it at the start. So you can see that it's actually pretty fresh. They haven't gotten the Z's off of it or anything. But at the end of the video, you can actually see the Ukrainian troops standing around and walking up to it to inspect the tank a little bit more now that they've captured it. It's incredibly interesting to me that we've now seen the shift of stolen vehicles, stolen Russian vehicles, go from the Russian army, well, not the Russian army, the Ukrainian farmers to the Ukrainian army. We're not really seeing farmers capture a lot of vehicles anymore. We're now seeing almost entirely the Ukrainian army capturing these vehicles intact, which gives us an incredibly good idea that the Ukrainians are the Ukrainian army is directly getting these vehicles, and these vehicles are probably being used by them 100% at this point, not being held in some kind of shed by a farmer. So with that, we're now going to move on to the next video, which is very harrowing. We've seen an armored personnel carrier of the Russian side knocked out at point-blank range. It's a crazy video. It's kind of like that one where we saw Rambo climb up on the rooftop of a building in Mariupol and take out a BMP-2. But anyways, here's that video. Of course, it's got copyrighted music, so let me make sure to mute that and rewind. The Ukrainian troops are somewhere on this side of the street. Unfortunately, they didn't show exactly where they shot from, but you can see that this little armored personnel carrier just went up. You can actually see part of the roof flying down to the ground up here. And so that tank is definitely knocked out. I don't know about the condition of the crew. I don't know if they were killed along with the vehicle being destroyed. But nonetheless, what a shot. And that was incredibly close for them to be shooting from. So anyways, with that, we've actually covered that bit of news, and we're now going to move on to the next bit of location unknown news, where we can see that apparently the Stig from Top Gear is a Russian soldier. In this picture here, all the faces are blurred out. I don't really know why, but nonetheless, you can see the Russians posing here, all of them wearing different kinds of armor rigs with different kinds of camos on them. And then finally, we've got the Stig right here in his typical motorcycle helmet. So that's kind of telling me that the Russians must be running out of helmets, because this is something you don't really see as standard issue equipment in a military. Of course, motorcycle helmets don't really offer a lot of protection against bullets. They offer a lot of protection if you're falling off a motorcycle, but bullets not so much. So that's kind of a little interesting to me that we're seeing that they're actually lacking equipment in that regard. And so I guess we're just going to have to wait and see if that is in fact the case for the rest of the Russian army, that they're lacking so much equipment they're having to put on motorcycle helmets. Very weird to me. And also something that's telling me that the Russians are having terrible times with their logistical chain still, because if they had a decent logistical supply chain, if this guy's helmet was damaged, they would have been able to just get him a new one. Yet they haven't been able to because he's wearing a motorcycle helmet. And the only reason I can assume that he would go with a lesser helmet in terms of its protective abilities is just because it's better than nothing, and nothing is the only alternative. So very interesting. That's once again an assumption I'm taking from this picture, based on some kind of logical reasoning. And so with that, that's the end of that news. We're now going to move on to the third to last location unknown news, where we can see that dog that I've showed so much on the stream called Patron is actually enjoying a little bit of his free time. We've seen this dog at work week after week. It's been a dog in the news, in the pictures for quite some time. And now we can see that the dog is enjoying his time off, and he's actually playing with one of the soldiers. So check this out. It's pretty cute. So look at it. This guy is playing with that dog like sandburrs. That's a cute little dog right there. And once again, an incredibly good dog. It's done an incredibly effective job as far as, in defusing and finding hundreds of bombs entirely on its own with, of course, the help of its handlers. And I gotta say, for a dog that small to do that much work, that's something impressive to me. And so, once again, big shout out to the dog patron here. He's been doing a wonderful job and also is a very cute dog. So with that, we're now going to move on to the second to last bit of Location Unknown news, where we can see that a Ukrainian soldier was loading with incredible speed inside of this SPG. That's what I'm assuming it is, at least. I don't really think it's an SPG because the shells that he's loading are actually kind of small. I'm not really sure what kind of round this is, but nonetheless, this man is loading this at inhuman speeds. So, nonetheless, oh yeah, I forgot. It's got copyright music, so unfortunately I can't play that. But I'm going to let this video play and let y'all see the speed at which this guy is reloading. And so, here he is, prepping the gun to fire. Now he fires the gun, he gets the next round, pushes it straight in, fires, gets the next round, loads it, pushes it straight in, fires again. This man is working at superhuman speeds. Now you can see that he's having a little bit of a problem shoving it in, but nonetheless, he did get the round in. He pushes it further in with a hammer. And now he's standing by. And so now he's back on the radio. But you can see there for the second, there we go, he fired again. He's reloading the next round. Once again, with incredible speed, especially for Russian equipment, we can now see he's pushing it the rest of the way in with a hammer, and then he fires it again. Here in a second, I'm assuming. Unfortunately, he didn't, huh? That was weird. Anyways, incredibly interesting video to watch. This guy is loading with the speed of a bionic man. Considering especially that it's Russian equipment, and we know that Russian equipment, well, Soviet equipment at least, is generally inferior due to a lack of budget, and they're also cutting corners a huge amount in Soviet factories historically at the time. It's something impressive to see someone actually load one of these guns with such a pace and a speed. I mean, like, this guy ought to go into a competition to load a gun like that because he is breaking some kind of records there. So anyways, that's the end of that. And now we're going to move on to the last bit of news. This isn't actually about the war in particular. This is actually about something I saw on Reddit today about this channel, which absolutely flipped me out. I couldn't believe it. And so I just thought it was really cool. I'm going to give a shout out to them. Hopefully they're watching tonight. But nonetheless, I got a shout out on Reddit by one of y'all, and I was so ecstatic to see it that I actually called Matthew down. I was like, Matthew, we're on Reddit. And so anyways, here's the little post that they made. This was made by a Reddit user called Marcel Durr, and I've got to say, huge shout out to you. I thank you so much for doing that. That was very nice of you. It's gotten 31 upvotes, which is really cool, and I guess I'll upvote it too. But anyways, they're just talking about when the streams run, talking about, how they like the stream. I thought this was really cool. I mean, like, this was neat, and it made my day, really. I was really ecstatic about this, and then we got a whole bunch of comments, Also, Marcel is really trying to sell this channel here, which I just thought was really funny and really cool, and I liked it a lot. And I was like, wow, this is neat. I love that a lot of people are in the community, and also someone said I raised 120K for charity. That's true, and I got to thank y'all all so much again for helping me reach that goal, and also all of us doing it together, because we all want to help out Ukraine the best we can, and we're all doing everything in our power to do that. Let's see, in 2 weeks it'll be 1 million. I hope it is. Let's see. And with that being said, someone said the famous line. Look at that. That's pretty funny. Also, another thing. Someone said, it's a good compilation of videos and things, but not much informed commentary, which he never claims to be, in fairness. Still a good watch. Okay, so I actually had, when I read that today, I was like, I gotta know. Am I sounding like I know what I'm talking about compared to other people? So I actually went to other YouTube channels. And I think most people's strike against me is that I don't have any military experience, which people kind of hold against me, which, I mean, honestly, kind of a truthful assessment there. But nonetheless, most of the people that they go to on YouTube, when they went through the military, they were in there for like a 4-year contract, at least in the US, and they got out as like an E4 or something. And like, to me, there's a difference, and I don't think a lot of people understand this, and I may not have a good understanding of it either because I've only talked to veterans, but nonetheless, I actually have talked to a lot of people that I know, both officers and enlisted. And while enlisted know the nitty gritty and the specialties of their tasks, like for example, an E4, a specialist, maybe 92 Alpha, which is an MOS revolving around like tank logistics, they're going to know everything backwards and forwards about tank logistics because that's their job, that's their specialty. That's what the entire modern world revolves around, is having a division of labor and having people assigned to specific jobs that they become masters at, pretty much. But the thing is that a corporal, is going to know a whole lot about tank logistics if that was their MOS. But they're not going. They're like, the honest truth is that everyone knows as much about grand battle tactics as the next guy, especially if you were enlisted in the military. That's not a strike against them. Okay, don't take that as that. I'm just saying that that's something that officers would know a decent bit about, and then officers never get on YouTube, because they're well paid. So that's pretty much what it is. But anyways, I was like, that's a decent assessment though. Got to say, can't really strike it too much. So someone said they subscribed, which was pretty cool. And also, once again, I do want to say, I don't know everything. I'm not saying that I'm a know-it-all. Of course, I can be wrong. I say that every time I say something. I could be proven wrong within a few days. And then I saw someone say, "Speak the truth is better," which I don't know. I've never seen their channel, but I bet you it probably is. Anyways, we're now going to move on from the Reddit post. I've been on that for too long. And so with that, we've actually covered all of the location unknown news today. I got to thank y'all once again for putting out that little shout out. That was really cool, and I liked it a lot. So thank you once again. It made my day. Anyways, we're now going to move on to the Kharkiv and the Donbas news in general. But before we do, we're going to take a couple of questions from the chat, about 3 to 5. And so with that, what do we got, Matthew?
All right, so good evening, everybody. It's Enforcer Matt once again with the questions. Up first, we have a $35 donation from longtime channel supporter Zeta Lane. And it's good to see you again, Zeta. We haven't seen you in quite a while. Who says, "Is it just me? I feel Putin is just a poser and that flaunting his nukes is just a bluff. The West seems to believe him as well. So disappointed that we couldn't help Mariupol. Am I being naive?"
Could you rephrase that one again for me real quick?
So let's see here. Zeta is saying that she feels like Putin is a poser that is just flaunting his nukes and that we are falling for his bluff. And she is asking, is she being naive?
I don't think so. That's actually pretty on par with what I'm thinking. So I thank you very much for the support. And to answer that in detail, the Russian military only has a $50 to $60 billion US dollar budget, as far as we know, as of this fiscal year. And so that's an incredibly small budget compared to the United States. The United States, in their discretionary spending, actually, I don't think that is. No, I think that is their. I'm not really sure. I think that actually does follow under discretionary spending, the defense budget. But nonetheless, in their discretionary spending budget, if I am correct, the U.S. military gets around $660 billion a year in funding. So just to give you an idea, if we took the Russian military's budget and subtracted that from the U.S. military's budget, the U.S. military's budget would still be $600 billion. So that kind of gives you a concept of how much money it costs us to maintain our military at the level it's at. So when you think about the Russian military, which has something like 3 times the armor, as many planes in their well, not as many planes in their Air Force, it's like a third of the planes in their Air Force that we have both combined in the U.S. Air Force and the U.S. Navy, and then they have a nuclear arsenal that is larger than ours. I'm very hard pressed to assume that they can fund all of that on a $50 to $60 billion budget. And then on top of that, run research and development programs to produce new equipment like the Su-57 and the T-14 Armada, and even new firearms like the AK-12. I'm just not seeing where they could do all that with a $50 to $60 billion budget. So I think that they are flaunting a whole bunch of stuff that they really don't have when you think about it, because it's too rough. It's just impossible, really, to assume that with that little funding, they can field an army that is equal to the United States. The money is just not there. It takes money to do everything. And so, I'm having a hard time explaining this in words, and also the chat's moving a million miles an hour right beside my face, but you know, like just think about this, okay? You have $100. You give one guy $100, the other guy gets $10, and you tell both of them you have to repair the engine in your car, and both of their cars are exactly the same, and they both have the same problem. The guy with $10 is going to have to find some way to jimmy rig that problem if it costs $50. The other guy who's got $100, he's going to be able to repair the problem completely the way it should be, the right way, because he's got the money to do it, and then he's going to have enough money left over to maybe even go and do something else with his car. So if you see what I'm saying there, that's kind of the position that the Russians are in, is that they just don't have the budget to do the things that the United States is doing, and so they are relying entirely on their nuclear threats to pretty much keep the Western world at bay, because if it wasn't for the nuclear threats, and they didn't have any nukes, they're such a second and third rate power militarily that really any Western country could actually give them a good run for their money, much like we're seeing Ukraine do right now. And Ukraine, like, the truth is that Ukraine isn't even comparable with Western militaries. It is well far behind in terms of its budget, its size, its equipment. It doesn't excel in any of those categories, yet nonetheless, we see them giving the Russians hell, which can tell you how poorly off the Russians are, and I think that is down a lot to their budget. So I do think that, I don't think that this is a naive statement at all. I can entirely agree with it. So sorry for going down that rabbit hole, but I thank you so much for coming back, Zedalane. We missed you. We actually noticed that you were gone. We were like, where did she go? And so I'm glad to see that you're back. Welcome back. And so I hope I answered that question pretty well, and I hope that was a good welcome back to the stream. And so with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And up next, we have a $25 donation from Joe Ben, who says, these streams have been a part of my end of the day routine since day 17. I usually fall asleep somewhere after the second section of news, but having that said, I have no questions. Thanks for what you guys do, and Slava Ukraine.
Slava Ukraina. Slava Ukraini, sorry about that. And also, thank you so much for the support. We actually did one interview today for a mod position on our server, and I hopped in the call. I don't think the guy knew I had hopped in the call. His name, actually, I won't say his Discord name. He may not want me to say that on stream. But anyways, he was talking about, he's like, I've been watching since day 6. I love the stream. I pump weights, and I listen to the stream while I'm pumping weights. And I thought that was that's crazy to me, because honestly, I'm just running my show like I did in the first days when no one was watching, and it's crazy to think that people love this stream so much, and it's really cool to see that there's been a community and a culture created out of this thing. There's jokes like Moscow Mike, and with that being said, and coffee breaks, and the sockeye salmon, and yeah, all that stuff. It's crazy to think that a whole entire culture has sprung up out of this thing. So I thank you so much for the support, and it is really cool. I honestly, it's kind of been hitting me today finally that I'm like, wow, this has actually become a real thing. But anyways, I thank you very much for the support. And with that, we're going to move on to our last question of this segment, and then we're going to move on to the Kharkiv and Donbas news.
And the last one of the segment goes to HT, a longtime channel supporter, who puts in a $20 donation and says, do you think there's any way supplies can be dropped into the defenders of Mariupol, maybe by sea?
Oh, now the sea, I can tell you that's entirely out, and here's why. There's only one corridor into the Sea of Azov, which is this sea right here that my crosshair is circling around. And the only way in is through the Kerch Strait right here at the tip of the Crimean Peninsula, here with this line in black. That's the only way to enter. So if the Ukrainians were to try and resupply Mariupol by sea, they would first have to probably set off these ships from Mykolaiv or Odessa, then set off past the Russian Black Sea Fleet, which is probably somewhere out here, and then around Crimea, the Crimean Peninsula, through the Kerch Strait, which is probably heavily defended and would be impossible to get through. It would almost be like going through the Strait of Bosphorus, I believe is the name, that kind of like intersects Istanbul. I also call that the Strait of Istanbul. Apparently it's got some kind of Turkish name. Unfortunately, I'm not too proficient with the Turkish language, so unfortunately I cannot pronounce that. But you can see that this would be suicide for the Russians to try and pass through. Oh, here, the Dardanelles Strait, and then you also have the strait that goes through the Istanbul area. But also there's the Golden Horn. So just know that if I did know the name of that, I would be calling it correctly if that is wrong. But anyways, that's the only way to supply Mariupol by sea. And there's a lot of problems with that because the Russians control all of this, and I'm sure that they're heavily defending it. So passing ships through there would be next to impossible, in my opinion. Then moving on from that, we'll get to the news today. It does sound like a humanitarian corridor tried to be established today, but beyond that, we've gone over this a couple of times on stream, but it's still important to cover, is that any kind of land bridge to Mariupol, where the Ukrainians tried to cross through and supply it that way, would be next to impossible because the Russians have a heavy force concentration around the city, so actually getting to the city may be much more easier than the task of actually reaching the Azov at this point, which has been pushed into the Azovstal. So then finally, the last one that a lot of people have been saying is, could they airdrop the supplies in, or could they have some kind of missile fly in and drop in the supplies that way? And here's my answer to those questions right there. The answer to that is airdrops. The Ukrainian Air Force was incredibly small starting off at the beginning of this war, and at this point, it sounds like it's nearly microscopic. It doesn't sound like they have a lot of aircraft left in the Air Force, and that's also why they are pleading with everyone to get them some aircraft. And I do have to agree that it seems imperative at this point that their Air Force be replenished by some external force, considering that they cannot produce aircraft themselves, and aircraft take an incredibly long time to manufacture in the modern world. So that's kind of out of the question. Also, the only kind of supply aircraft that the Ukrainians have in mass is Antonov 22s. Wait a minute, I'm sorry. No, let me make sure I get that correct. Ukrainian Air Force. Let's see. Air Force. I know I spelled that wrong. Sorry about that. Planes. So let's check out the list of aircraft they have, of course, on Wikipedia. It's a pretty decent source. So, let's see here. Transport. They have Antonov 26s. These are incredibly small for supply aircraft. They only have one Antonov 70, which you can... It kind of honestly looks a lot like an A400M, although I'm sure that it's different in a lot of ways. And then finally, the last they have is an Antonov 72 and also a 74, which really looks like the same plane, and it looks like they're kind of grouped in the same category. Finally, they have 7 Ilyushin 76s and 3 orders of Antonov 178s, which aren't even in their inventory. So in total, they have around 30 transport aircraft, and most of these are smaller size. So, honestly, I gotta say, they just don't have the numbers to really risk something like that. Most of these aircraft would probably be shot down on the way there, and the supplies would be lost along with the crews and the aircraft, which would just be too much of a loss for the Ukrainians. On top of that, moving on to the last one, the cruise missiles, we don't know the actual size of Ukraine's cruise missile inventory to know if that would even be effective or economical. And on top of that, the real question is, how much supplies could a single cruise missile carry, and how many cruise missiles would they have to launch per day to drop off enough supplies for the Azov to keep going? And then once we get into those numbers, it may appear to be pretty much entirely out of the question that there really is no way to supply them. And I hate to say that, but I think the Ukrainians have pretty much observed that at this point, and that's why we don't really see any supply efforts occurring to the Azov and the 36th Infantry Brigade that's stuck in the Azovstal anymore, because there's really just no feasible way to do it. And I hate to say that, but that is what I'm seeing right now. But I thank you very much for the support, and I hope that answers the question in every aspect, in every avenue. And so with that, we've actually reached the end of this question segment. Don't worry, if you've thrown in a super chat, we will make sure to get to all of them before the end of the night. I do want to make sure that I give y'all something in return for helping me do what I do. I'm very grateful to everyone who does support the channel. And so, with that, we're now going to move on to the Kharkiv news. Also, by the way, just for everyone else, you don't have to throw in a super chat to get your question answered. At the very end of the stream, we actually answer questions from the live chat, about 3 of them. So throw in a good question, and you may be one of the lucky people who is selected to get a question answered. So just wait until the end of the stream, and you will probably see that your question may have been selected. And so with that, we're now going to move on to the Kharkiv news. Starting off on outside of the perimeter of Kharkiv and more so in the countryside, we've seen that a large Russian supply cache has been found near the city of Kharkiv. Some 200 tons of equipment, $200 million of equipment was stored within this supply cache. As we can see here, this appears to be some radar-guided air-to-air missile, I'm assuming. Not exactly sure. Also, thank you, Will Riley. We will get to that question in the next segment for sure. So you can see here more equipment. And then in the last picture, I'm not exactly sure what that is. I would love to tell y'all what that is, but I can't say with absolute certainty what that is. But nonetheless, we do know that $200 million of equipment was within this depot, and the Ukrainians have secured it. And since pretty much Russian equipment and Ukrainian equipment is cross-compatible because they all have Soviet origins, this means that all of this equipment will be usable by the Ukrainians. Incredibly good news to hear, and so I'm very glad that the Ukrainians have found this large cache of equipment and will be able to use it for themselves. So great job to them. Gotta say, wonderful to hear. And so we're now going to move on to the next bit of news inside of Kharkiv, where we've seen a residential building once again being hit inside the city. It pains me to see footage like this. It's pretty normal nowadays to see. You know, it's been a war, and you know, I've got to be honest with y'all, because I don't know if y'all go through the same things I go through, but I've been doing this for nearly 2 months now, and I've seen this type of footage so much that you just look at it, and you know, it's happened so much, and I've just got to be honest. I've kind of gotten desensitized to everything. I've seen people get burned through to the point that all that remains is part of their rib cage with some flesh on it. I've seen a kid's head been halfway blown off. You know, that's just a few of the things I've seen making this news every day. And so, you know, at some point you just kind of get desensitized to this stuff. But nonetheless, just because I've been desensitized to it doesn't mean that, you know, you don't get the picture anymore that this stuff is egregious and terrible, and the Russians who are doing this stuff ought to be held accountable for it. And so with that, I'm going to show you all this video real quick. You can hardly see it. It's really just looking down the street, but you can see the lights go out on the residential building that it hit in frame. And so here's the video. So you can see that a large amount of debris came falling off of that building, and now all the lights have gone out within that residential building. I'm not sure how many people were killed in that explosion. I'm sure that there were many, probably at least a dozen or more. And I just hate to know that something like that has happened once again. And I pray and hope that the Russians who are conducting these missile strikes will be held accountable and hopefully can be captured. I'm sure that these missiles aren't actually being fired within Ukrainian territory, so the thought of that is highly unlikely. They're most likely being fired from inside of Russia, where these crews will be safe from direct Ukrainian threats. So, I hate to think about that, but nonetheless, I do hope that one day they can be held accountable for their crimes. We'll now move on outside of Kharkiv, down around the Donbas, which we've heard no news from today, which is incredibly bizarre, because they are in the middle of an offensive. And so it's very weird to me that we haven't heard any news, because that is suggesting one of two things. The Ukrainians may be holding, and the Ukrainians are very careful about releasing footage onto the internet. They make sure to not upload anything that gives away their locations or anything like that. So that may suggest that they're actually holding their ground or gaining it. And we also haven't seen anything from the Russians saying that they've taken new towns, which does tell us that this offensive here in Izyum, the thrust down towards Slovyansk, has been stalled. We also know that there's been no progress in the Rubizhny area, which is directly behind Severodonetsk, and if the Russians manage to create a breakthrough in the Rubizhny area, we do know that that would probably lead them to have a very easy time encircling Lysychansk and Severodonetsk, both in one fell swoop, and creating a Mariupol in the eastern side of the country. But I don't believe that's actually going to be the case. It seems like most of the offensive is centered around Izyum itself, with some 13 to 20,000 troops, you know, and divide that down to the BTGs, which are around 800 soldiers apiece, are actively involved in the fighting heading towards Slovyansk. Finally, in this area, we've actually heard, and I didn't put this on the news today because I couldn't get it confirmed, but there was some kind of Russian push near this town called Grakovy, I believe is how that's pronounced in Ukrainian, as we can see there. And it actually according to the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense, the battle was, the offensive there, the push by the Russians, was actually defeated, and the Russian forces withdrew from the field and apparently have regrouped back where they started. So it appears that the Russian offensive, at least in that area, has completely stalled due to fierce resistance in that one spot. So that's incredibly good news to hear. It's good to hear that this bulge in the Ukrainian lines is being held incredibly well, because bulges are an incredibly effective frontline apparatus to use. Of course, they're dangerous because they could be encircled, but at the same time, they're incredibly beneficial because if utilized properly, it can lead to a large withdrawal of troops that are about to be encircled by that bulge. So with that, we're now going to move on to the only bit of news we've gotten out of the entire Donbas today. And I've got to say again, this is really weird to me because, first off, it is an offensive. and there's no news. So we're going to try and get as much news as possible in the coming days if we can, but nonetheless, there's just none of it. It's weird to me. I'm going to leave it at that, because I've said that about 3 times now. I'm just wanting y'all to know how bizarre this is to me. Anyways, the only bit of news we've seen, of course, is that the Donetsk artillery is working overtime near the town of Popasnia, which is actually where this marker is. So the artillery isn't in Popasnia. It's around it, firing towards it, and that's really all the information we've got. So I'm going to let y'all see this video real quick. And I'd like to say, whoever did the camouflaging work on this tank went overkill. It looks like they cut down an entire forest of saplings to cover this tank with enough foliage that it looks like it's a swamp creature. I've never seen anyone actually camouflage a tank that much. You can literally see this is just a small tree they've leaned on the back of the thing. Bizarre nonetheless. But anyways, I'm going to let the video play. And so actually in that last bit of video, you can actually see that their incredible camouflaging job with the saplings fell apart completely right here because all the trees fell off after the recoil rocked the tank. So doing all of that to gather up that foliage for that video was completely useless. It all fell apart within seconds. So with that, that is actually all of the news that we've gotten out of the Donbas. And so we're actually now going to cover this bit of news right here before we go to the next 3 to 5 questions from the chat, which is that the Ukrainians have conducted a humanitarian corridor today into Mariupol. It was agreed upon by the Russians and Ukrainians. A slight glimmer of hope of humanitarianism on the Russian side, considering that they agreed to it. But nonetheless, as far as the news I could collect, the humanitarian corridor fell apart because the Russians began to fire at it. And so it sounds like the evacuation attempt had to have been aborted by the Ukrainians due to the danger to the crews involved. But nonetheless, in this video from earlier today, we could see the buses lined up for what seems to be miles that were going to head into Mariupol and evacuate all of the citizens as much as they could. And I've got to say, something like this is eerily similar to what happened at Pripyat during the Chernobyl disaster. Back then, they actually evacuated the entire city of 50,000 people within one day. And so bus after bus, it was an endless line of miles of buses that drove into Pripyat, picked up the citizens, and then drove out, and they never returned. And there's a lot of similarities in between those two stories. The citizens of Mariupol may never return to Mariupol once they're evacuated. It's not a Chernobyl situation. Of course, they will probably rebuild the city and they'll return eventually. But it's still something that's eerily similar because they probably won't return for an incredibly long time. So, anyways, I'm going to let the video wrap up. You can actually see that these vehicles are clearly marked with red crosses. So that way they're known as humanitarian vehicles and not some kind of Ukrainian military vehicles. You know, the fact that the Russians, as far as the news we've gotten, fired on them as they tried to head into Mariupol today says a lot about their actual intentions on the ground. And so with that, we've covered all of the news from the Kharkiv area and the Donbas in general. And so before we move on to Mariupol, we're going to answer another 3 to 5 questions from the chat. So make sure to get in a question if you would like. Of course, Super Chats do support this channel and help us do what we do. So if you do enjoy the content, make sure to throw in a Super Chat and we'll get to it. Or if you would like to get something out of it rather than just a question answered, we do have some channel merch. And so with that, we're going to move on to the questions. So what do we got, Matthew?
Okay, and up next we have a $100 donation from longtime channel supporter Will Riley. He says, even with the sanctions, Putin has managed to stabilize the ruble and stuff his war chest with the help of NATO countries, sending $1 billion a day from purchasing resources from Russia. This fact disappoints the great Dick Cheney.
Well, thank you very much for the support, Will Riley. That's a huge amount of support again, and it does help us a whole load. But to answer that question, really that comment, that is true. The ruble has stabilized, and we're going to pull that up right here on stream. Ruble to US dollar. And you can actually see that it has rebounded. So let's go back to the entire year. Now, it's not as high as it once was, and we do have to remember that the ruble is practically worthless already. 1 ruble is worth nearly 1 cent, a little bit over 1 American cent. So just keep that in mind. But when it dropped down to being less than a cent. At its lowest, it was 0.7 of a penny. So that gives you an idea of how worthless Russian currency got. That was on March 7th. It apparently reached its low on the 7th of March. But we can see now that the ruble has largely rebounded and it's back up to being worth 1.2 pennies. But before that, it was worth 1.4 pennies. Now, if we go back over many years, if we actually go back to the maximum of time, you can actually see that the Russian ruble has been depreciating over an incredibly long amount of time. And what's oddly interesting enough is that they actually correlate to Russian actions around the world. First off, the invasion of Georgia, right here in 2008. We can see that the ruble dropped off there, and then it never really rebounded. Then it stayed pretty much stable, being around, being worth 3 cents per 1 ruble. 2014, the Russians got involved in the Donbas. Also, it sounds like you are unmuted, just making sure you know that, Matthew. But we can see right here that it was worth around 3 cents. Then in 2014, when the Russians invaded the Donbas, we can see that it dropped down to being around 2 pennies. And so over time, it has gotten down from 2 pennies to pretty much just 1. And then the economic damage that has been caused by the recent economic sanctions appears to have rebounded incredibly quickly, which I do have to say at this point, I gotta say, it looks like these economic sanctions against the ruble this round have been ineffective because it's rebounded. And in all previous instances, we've seen that when the sanctions were implemented by previous administrations, there was never a rebound. It dropped in 2008, 2009. I believe that would have been under the Bush/Obama administration. Then we can see that it dropped once again under the Obama administration under heavy sanctions. Of course, nothing happened during the next administration. And then during this one, it looks like the sanctions just haven't done enough. And I mean, like, there's really not much you can do beyond this point, though, in all fairness, because it's pretty much dropped to rock bottom. But still, the fact that it's rebounded so quickly is concerning, and it does show that Western sanctions, in a way, may not be as tough as they need to be, honestly. But anyways, I thank you very much for the support. I hope that does address the question in some way. And so with that, we're going to move on to the next question. And I thank you very much once again for the huge support.
And up next, we have a $137 donation from Stephen Mentier, and he does not leave a comment. Thank you very much, Stephen. I know you've been around the channel for quite some time, and we appreciate your continued support of the channel. As we constantly say over and over and over, it helps us keep running the channel, so thank you very much. Up next here, we have a comment from BC Skyman, who is also a longtime channel supporter, who puts in a $20 donation and says, does the Ukrainian military have the capability to shoot down the bombers that are now bombing Mariupol? Did they receive the S-300? I also heard that they received some new MiGs. Still no reinforcements in Mariupol, and great job.
Thank you very much for the support, and of course I do appreciate everyone's donations. I also like to circle back real quick to Stephen Mentier and personally thank him myself. It does mean a lot to us, and I am incredibly appreciative. And I hate when people put in donations and they don't ask a question, because I feel like I just feel so wrong doing that, because there's nothing I'm giving you in return. But I guess to y'all, the news is good enough. And so if that is the case, I thank y'all so much. It's incredibly generous of y'all. But to answer the question that you just had, can you read that back to me real quick? Actually, I forgot it.
So let's see here. Let's see. So there's the question from BC Skyman, who says, does the Ukrainian military have the capability to shoot down the bombers that are bombing Mariupol? Did they receive the S-300? And are there any reinforcements in Mariupol?
Yes, to answer that question, they have received S-300s. We don't know an exact figure, but they have. And we also know that they had some, I believe, before the war started in their own inventory. But to move on from that, we can actually tell a couple of things. First off, the S-300s wouldn't be usable in Mariupol itself. So that's kind of out of the question. Getting them there would be impossible. So the best we could assume is that they could place them somewhere on the front line and then try and fire at the aircraft over Mariupol. If they are flying over land at all, the Russian aircraft may be flying down into the Sea of Azov, then coming over Mariupol, bombing it, and then turning around and flying back out into the Sea of Azov to try and keep out of Ukrainian air defenses as much as possible. But anyways, if they are flying over land, the farthest away an S-300 would probably be from those aircraft at its shortest distance near Mariupol is somewhere about 30 miles. So let's pull up the range of an S-300. let's see if we can get any particular information about this system. Let's see. I think we actually saw it right there. With an engagement range of up to 250 miles. So that's clearly within range. So they could really put those anywhere east of the Dnieper and maybe even west of it and actually be within the range of hitting these Russian strategic bombers. But the question is, do they have the ability to even detect them? Because it appears here in this infographic that I'm seeing on Google Images, this isn't just one vehicle, it's actually a series of vehicles, and the S-300 missile system is just a vehicle on its own. Apparently there's a surveillance radar that must be used. Of course, there has to be some kind of communications vehicle, so they have a command center. Then an engagement radar, which apparently triangulates the surface-to-air missiles trajectory towards the aircraft. And so you can see that from this infographic alone, because I'm not an expert on S-300 systems, so just want to make that clear to everyone, on this infographic alone, they're going to have more than just the launch vehicles themselves to effectively field them. And that's the question. Are they getting these vehicles as well? And so I don't really know the answer to that, but if they do have all of these vehicles that are involved within this process, we can get the generally reasonable assumption that they will be able to field them and shoot down the strategic bombers being used over Mariupol itself. If they don't, then the S-300s may just be for show and they're missing the vital equipment that's needed to run them. So that's kind of my assessment. Take it for what you will. I'm not an expert, again, on S-300 systems, so you know, take it with a grain of salt, but that is my opinion right now on that matter. So I thank you so much for the support. And with that, we're going to move on to 2 more questions, and then we're going to cover the Mariupol news and the Southern Front news, as well as the remaining international news.
And real quick, I want to recognize a $20 donation from Michael ... Thank you very much for your donation to the channel. Next up, we have a $20 donation from Alan, who says, Enforcer, FYI, I'm an aircraft mechanic. I've worked on MiG-15 and MiG-21 for the private sector. I can say Russian aircraft are tough. The skin is almost 100 inches thick and anodized, i.e. AK-47.
Well, thank you very much for the support. And also, that's very interesting that you have been working on some of the antiques of the Russians, like the MiG-15s and 21s. I'm sure you're probably working on them for air show groups or something like that. I think that's the only way most of those are used. I have seen a MiG-15 before at an air show. But nonetheless, that's incredibly interesting, and I do like that you said 100 inches of steel. I do remember, though, actually speaking seriously about the MiG-15, when the North Korean pilot defected with his MiG-15 to South Korea, and the United States ripped the thing apart, I remember that they actually found out during test flights that there was a million problems and shortcomings with the MiG-15. Like, I believe one of the pumps, if it was activated the wrong way, it would cause some kind of vacuum inside the pump and it would explode and pretty much tear the plane apart. So there was a bunch of interesting things about Russian equipment. And also I have a relative of mine who used to be an Air Force pilot who flew an F-15. I'm not really sure which kind, if it was the F-15A or C. He flew them when they were brand new and they were the equivalent of the F-22 back then. But anyways, he talked about he actually got to take a very good look during some of the schools that they provided in the Air Force at Russian aircraft and the ones they've been able to get a hold of. And he was talking about how primitive their technology was compared to their Western counterparts. So I thank you very much for the support. I do like the joke. If that was a joke, I'm sure they don't have obviously 100 inches of steel on them, or else they wouldn't be able to fly. So thank you very much once again. And with that, we're going to move on to the last question of this segment.
And for the last question of the segment, we have a $20 donation from MR, who says, how did your final go today?
I didn't actually have a final today. I'm going to have 2 finals on Friday, which take a lot of preparation. One of them involves creating a PowerPoint and also having academic sources. And while I've gotten most of the academic sources tracked down, I haven't actually taken it yet or turned it in to get a grade. But so far, the only final... Actually, no, I've actually turned in 2 finals at this. Oh, yeah, actually, I did take a final today. Thank you very much for reminding me about that. Jeez, it was the math one. But I made an 80 on it, which wasn't good. I kind of got distracted, and also it was on that Proctor U system. If any of y'all have used that, it's terrible. But nonetheless, it's okay. I mean, it's not is not great, not terrible. It is what it is. And then the other one that I've already submitted, it was like a 97 or something. It was incredibly good, and that was in like finance class. But I thank you very much for the support and asking about my personal ventures. I hope that wasn't a little bit too much information. But with that, we're going to round out that question segment because I don't want to hold y'all from the news that is incredibly important, the beating heart and soul of this war, which is the battle that's still going on in Mariupol to this day. On day 56, the defenders of Mariupol have held out for more than 50 days, and they're about to go on to holding for 2 entire months. These people, and I have to give a speech every time I talk about them because I feel like they deserve every single word that I can give in praise of these people. These people have been fighting in this city with a lack of food, water, and basic modern necessities, and they have kept on going for over 50 days. They have fought for every single bloody block in that city. Every single one of these little streets that divide up these city blocks are coated with Russian and Ukrainian blood, as they have literally fought street by street, hour by hour, and day by day to hold this city for as long as they can. And they don't just hold it to hold it. They are holding it for a greater cause. They're holding it to help out the entirety of Ukraine and help them have as good a standing in this war as possible. And the fact that they have kept on fighting for this long when they have been given the option to surrender multiple times and they've refused it multiple times tells you that these are extraordinary men, men that should be remembered for the rest of all time. If this city is ever managed to be recaptured by Ukraine and it's not handed off in some kind of peace agreement or anything like that, I hope that the Azovstal has a massive memorial. Well, not really a memorial. I don't believe memorials. I don't really like memorials. I like monuments. I believe a monument should be built to these amazing fighting men who have been doing nothing but the most incredible things for the past 50 days. It's historic. So anyways, I'm not going to give them too much of a speech. We're just going to get into the news of what's been happening down there to them today. Starting off on the left side of the Azovstal and moving to the right, we can first off see that this reporter, who's surprisingly an American planted with the Russians, is a little bit stirred and a little bit shaken. So I'm going to let y'all see this. He's not doing too good of a job of reporting, so here's the video.
I'm Patrick Lancaster, and right now we are back at the corner, just about 100 to 150 meters from some of the last Azov Ukrainian military.
Now this guy is made of something else. You know, his mama told him he was going to be a special boy, and it looks like he was a special boy. He's scared as hell right now. I can tell you that. Now, one thing I just don't get is people who put themselves in situations like that, and you can tell that this guy wants to go home. He's scared as hell. So anyways, I'm gonna let the video continue. It's just like, I know this is propaganda. This guy is one of those goofy, misguided people who think that Russia is actually in the right, and that's why he's over there reporting with them. But this guy, nonetheless, is just entertaining to me because he's so freaked out the whole entire time. So anyways, I'm just gonna let the video continue.
Still holding it here, and the Chechen DPR Russian forces are trying to push into Azovstal, one of the last, if not the last, stronghold of the Azov battalion here in Mariupol. Now we're going to show you what this active battle is like.
And he tried to recover it at the end. Now make note of that. He actually tried to recover it and act like he was all badass and stuff, but you just can't recover after flopping at the beginning so bad like that. He jumped at every little noise, and he looked so damn scared, and now at the end of it, he was like, let's get to the battle. Like, come on. Like, don't kid yourself. You're scared as hell. And if you are, you might as well just act like, you might as well be like, here, we are near the Azovstal. I'm scared shitless. That's what I would say if I was in his position and scared as hell like that. But I never put myself in the position of being around pro-Russian forces like these scraggly looking guys, and talking about what they're doing like it's some kind of good thing. So anyways, I'm going to let the video continue. So now we can see them moving up. Of course, one thing I would like to note, of course, this is a blurry place to stop it, but this fella here, he doesn't really look like he's actually near the fighting. The sound of the firefights is really close, but that street's empty. Like, there's no other infantry on that street, which is telling me this is another one of those staged videos. But anyways, we're going to watch this clown pretty much run around this town and act like he's really showing something. So let's let the video continue.
Сейчас вот здесь зачищаем.
So this guy said we're doing a sweep here now. I'm assuming that he's got a straw broom or something. That's probably the best that the Russian military can provide him with, because this here we're probably about to see him. Okay, because I haven't seen the whole video. I just saw the front, and I've always seen a little bit of this guy here and there, and it's just funny as hell to watch him because he's terrible at his job. But anyways, we're about to see this guy probably just hold this AK like a pistol and fire it where he's not even bracing the gun, which, you know, of course helps out with accuracy when firing. But nonetheless, we're gonna watch this and see what he does. Also, I did look at the chat there. I can't see the chat. I just don't want to like talk about it too much because it detracts. But I have seen a lot of people saying this guy isn't even wearing a helmet. I've noticed that too. I just didn't really think about it until y'all said it. This man has no helmet, no optics. This guy looks like he just came out of, hell, I don't know, like a third world country that's got no budget for its military right here. Like, what is this? What is he supposed to be? And look at this armband. Like, that doesn't even look like duct tape. That looks like something else. That looks like a white garbage bag that he got and he wrapped it around his arm. But I do like how he's got a nice modern Z patch right there, so that way you know he's the good guy in Russian media. So, I'm gonna let this keep on playing. So this guy's actually bracing the AK on his shoulder, so I have to give him a little bit of credit here. He is doing better than the guys we've seen before. Because the Chechens don't ever brace the gun on their shoulder. They just hold the thing up and fire it. And, you know, it's so inaccurate. You can tell because the recoil is huge. Like, how they're holding the gun. I mean, like, I've shot an AK before in full auto. It's not that bad, okay? But the way they manage it, it looks terrible. It looks very inaccurate. So, this guy, he actually looks like he knows what he's doing. He may be missing equipment, but he actually knows how to shoot a gun. So, I got to give this guy a little bit of credit for that. So you see, he scared the hell out of the reporter, man, because look, the camera shook when he fired. This guy is so jumpy, he jumps at everything.
And this is what we call a true street battle. This is how it goes here.
So why is the guy talking? Oh, hang on. This guy's not making any sense. You see, this is why he's entertaining. This guy's sitting there talking in a whisper like he's in a library in the middle of a firefight. Why is this guy so stupid? And look at him. What was all this flailing of the arms and stuff before he even started talking? It's like he was trying to coalesce the words. Look at this. This guy's goofy, oh my lord. This guy gives me a good laugh, and just for that reason, I've got to show this video.
60, 70 meters from the Azov battalion, the Ukrainian soldiers. And they are getting hit hard right now. We're gonna see how this plays out.
Now we can see the guy reloading his AK. Now he's trying to hold it all cool and stuff. This is the usual kind of like southern guy on the porch with a shotgun pose. Now we can see him holding it another way that isn't as difficult to do. So now you see them just walking off. I mean, like, you know, supposedly they're engaging Azov troops. Now they're just walking down the street like nothing happened. So, you know, another funny thing is that they're supposedly standing right in the line of fire from these Azov guys. That's something else to me. It's like, this whole thing is just so fake. It's kind of like the guy who was taking the video of the people supposedly clearing Ukrainian mines, but he was standing in front of them. And now they're saying the sweep is done. What did they do? What did they do? They did nothing. Look at that. I mean, like, they did absolutely nothing. And now they're like, sweep's done, we've won. That's the typical Russian special operation kind of thing right here, where they do nothing and then they say they've won.
Еще одну точку. Фу, пошли. Все, отработали дом. Чисто. Все, уходим. Уходим.
But I know this is typical Russian propaganda. We've seen this a lot. But it's still hilarious to me that this guy is the one doing the reporting. He's not good at it. Not at all.
So, we're pulling back. Engel, можем сказать, что там был, как это, был дом или что?
Ну, там пулеметное гнездо и 2 снайпера. И 2 автоматчика. Все, они уже все уничтожены полностью. Проход свободный сейчас, все. Все, уходим отсюда.
Okay, so we're told it's the fight in that particular apartment block that the Ukrainians were using is done now. It's been cleared, as they say. So we're going to go on to the next story. So please like, subscribe, share, and...
And what's up to the last thing? Well, don't like, subscribe, or share none of that. That's awful news. I mean, like, this guy is terrible at it. But also, why does this guy wear this helmet like it's a bonnet? Like, it's so high up on his helmet that his whole entire front of his face is exposed. Like, if I don't understand. Anyways, get a load of this guy. Anyways, we're just going to leave that at that. We're now going to move on from that entertaining vaudeville show, and we're now going to move on to the next bit of news, where we can actually see an MLRS directly firing into a building in Mariupol. Apparently, this is at the Ilyich Steelworks, which is on another side of town. I'm not really sure if there's a Ukrainian holdout there. We don't have any information about it, so I think that this video may have been from a while ago when there was defending forces still in the Ilyich Steelworks. But if there are defenders in the steelworks still, let me know, and I will try and look into that as much as I can. Anyways, here's the video. I'm going to rewind that real quick because pretty much most of the action begins at the start. You can see the MLRS rocket flying in from off-screen and straight into the building. Apparently, this is an instance of an MLRS truck being brought into a direct fire role inside of the city, which is something incredibly rare. We actually have not seen that before. So I'm going to let the video continue. Also, I like Bible traditions, a little Seinfeld reference there. Love it. I'm a big fan of Seinfeld, by the way. Anyways, you can see that the building was being hit by MLRS strikes, and I'm of course pretty certain that this is not fake. You can't really fake this kind of stuff all too well, but nonetheless, this MLRS was doing a decent amount of damage to this building, especially within this shot, which looks like it took off a decent amount of the wall. So with that, that's the end of that video. Unfortunately, there's not a lot of news about the defenders inside of the building. Anything beyond what we could see in the video would be entirely assumptions, and I don't like to make way too many of those, specifically on such a vague video as this. And so we're now going to move on to the next bit of news that we've seen around the Azov, where we can see firing AGS at the Ukrainians in Mariupol. So I'm going to let y'all see that real quick. And so this is a Russian grenade launcher, kind of self-explanatory. That's what an AGS is.
Снаряды по живой силе противника. Огонь!
So now we can see them firing the grenade launcher. Now we can see them firing again. Once again, we don't know where they're firing this at. And also, I'd like to note that this guy has got a dirk. I know that's some other kind of dagger, but that looks a lot like a Scottish dirk. I am a bagpiper, so I do have a dirk. It's something that I have put on my uniform before, if you want to call it a uniform. And that looks a lot like it. I don't know why the guy's carrying around a dirk, if that is one. But nonetheless, it's not the weirdest thing we've seen. The weirdest thing I've seen is how many armbands they've got on. They look like Morris dancers from England. Anyways, I'm going to let the video continue. So that's the end of it. Also, you can see some Seinfeld clips right there, just so you know. It's actually my recommend. I watch Seinfeld clips that much. Anyways, we're going to move on to the next video. That was pretty much self-explanatory. Of course, we don't know what they were firing at, and it could have been entirely staged, which I'm highly assuming is the case. We're now going to move around the Azovstal, and then we're going to cover the bit of news that appears to have actually occurred within the Azovstal metallurgical plant. And so, moving on from that, we're going to show some DPR forces in action in Mariupol. So the video is pretty self-explanatory. It is what it is. So I'm just going to let y'all see it real quick. As you can see here, the tank is moving up with the infantry, which is rare. I mean, like that's incredibly rare. We've never really seen a lot of that before in this war. And this is one of the first instances where we've actually seen the Russian tanks being supported directly by infantry, which we can see clearly in the video. So now you can see the tank firing into the buildings. I don't know what this guy is saying, unfortunately. But anyways, you can see that these are the apartment buildings surrounding the Azovstal plant, which you can just see right there in the background. That is something, as far as I know, I think the Azovstal has been pushed all the way inside of the metallurgical plant from the information I've been able to gather. So I think that this may, of course, be one of those staged videos, because the information I've gotten contradicts the videos we're seeing, or maybe the videos are suggesting that the Azovstal actually holds a decent amount more ground than what I've been able to gather from the situation. I'm not really sure which way is which, but nonetheless, we will keep an eye out for any more news to try and get a better assessment of the west or the eastern front line on the Azovstal metallurgical plant. And so with that, we're now going to move on to the next bit of news around the Azovstal plant, where we can see that the Chechens, apparently in a lack of equipment or a search for better equipment, are looting bodies under fire. That's something incredibly dangerous for them to do, and that's why I'm assuming that they may be lacking equipment at this point, because why in the world put yourself under so much danger to get such little in return out of it? And so, the video isn't graphic, but I am going to let y'all see it. There are dead bodies in it, so if you are a little bit sensitive to that, I'm just going to let that be known, but it isn't anything incredibly graphic to the point that it could be classified as graphic content. So I'm going to let y'all see the video real quick. So anyways, you can see the bodies out here in the street. They try and grab an AK off of it, and then they come under fire, which they then have to run quickly away from the body. And it looks like the guy actually dragged the body with him. I gotta say, I don't know if that's a Chechen who's dropped dead there, or a Ukrainian. I'm not sure which is which. But unfortunately, the man is dead, and apparently they have begun to loot bodies in a vain attempt to probably gain more supplies and equipment through the process of doing that. That's really something to me, and I hate to see stuff like that. I really hate to see bodies being desecrated. I know equipment, of course, is valuable, but still, to desecrate bodies pretty much to try and loot the equipment off of them seems very disrespectful to me, to either side if they're dead. So anyways, I'm going to let the video continue. Oh, you can see that the guy was actually successful. So now we can see they're running off to what appears to be the next body. It does appear to be Ukrainian because it's got a blue band on it, and they're stealing the AK off of it. Okay, alright, we can get the idea now what they're doing. They're stealing the AKs either because most of their rifles are now worn out. Maybe the barrels have worn out on them, although that's weird. I mean, how in the world do they wear out that quick? I know they haven't fired thousands of rounds through them. Or, you know, Russian manufacturing could lead to them pretty much falling apart really quickly. And so now they're scavenging Ukrainian bodies to try and find more AKs on them, so that way they can try and replenish their stores, because the logistics lines have probably fallen apart behind them, and they're probably not getting any supplies from the rear. So, still, you know, if that's the case, they're getting into a little bit of trouble there in Mariupol, and they may have a very hard time pushing an offensive into the Azovstal, considering they're now having to loot weapons to even have usable weapons, as far as we can assume. Also, to answer something I saw, someone said that there were red armbands on him. You could clearly see on the second guy there was a blue band on his helmet, which does indicate that he is Ukrainian. So we're going to just leave that for what it is. I hate to see that some of the defenders have fallen, but nonetheless, we do know that they are doing an invaluable service in the defense of their country, and so their deaths are not in vain. I hate to see that they have died nonetheless, but still, we can get a good amount of things from this video, and we can collect that apparently the Chechens are running out of arms or ammo for those arms, and they're now having to resort to looting bodies to get any. So that's very important to note. That may be the reason why we're not seeing a lot of progress anymore around the Azovstal, at least as far as a Russian push into it. And so that may also be another reason why we're seeing the Russians use a lot more air assets around the city. One, because the air defenses have been mostly wiped out around there, and secondly, it may be because the ground forces have now stalled, and to keep up any kind of pressure, they have to now start using strategic bombers to drop enough ordnance to make a high enough amount of pressure on those defenders to make sure that their morale can be lowered and that they're war-weary and exhausted, pretty much. And so with that, we're now going to move on to the last bit of news that I've been able to assess is around or outside of the Azovstal, where we've seen the Chechens bait a sniper today with a dummy head with a helmet on it. So, I just like to say, great job for this guy. He's going to use his airsoft helmet that he got on wish.com for 25 bucks to draw out a Ukrainian sniper, and he's not going to have a usable helmet after that. They're already looting Ukrainians for weapons. How well does this bozo think this is going to go? What is he going to do with the helmet after it's been shot? We probably know that he's not getting another one. So, where's he going to get another helmet? Are they going to loot that off of bodies too? Like, you know, I got a lot of questions about this, but nonetheless, in this video, let's take a look at this real quick before I say anything. A lot of things about this video don't make a lot of sense. First off, what sniper would fall for someone's head being that high above a fence with a pole right under it? That's kind of a little obvious to me, don't you think? And also another thing is that where the hell did this bullet come from? Like the snap and the powder that came out of that little concrete post right there made it look like it came from right behind the cameraman. Let's take a look at that again. I don't know, it may have come from around the other side of the wall, but I'm kind of skeptical about that. I'm really skeptical that that even worked at all. It all seemed very staged in a way to me, but that's only my assessment. Let me know in the chat what y'all think. And so with that, we're now going to move on to the last bit of news that we've been able to assess has most likely occurred directly within the metallurgical plant itself, where a BMP-3 by the pro-Russian forces has been seen in action inside of the Azovstal. So here's the video. I'm going to let y'all see this real quick. I'm going to have to mute it because there is copyrighted music in it. So you can see that they're hitting, not exactly sure what kind of building that is, but it does have a conveyor belt leading to it. Unfortunately, I'm not really a metallurgical plant expert, so unfortunately, I don't know what kind of building that is. Nonetheless, we can see a larger complex, a 4-story building, it seems, being hit as well. We can also see explosions rocking the ground near the bottom left of the video. And so you can actually see the BMP-3 right there at the bottom of the video, right where my mouse is circling, and that is the vehicle that has been hitting all of these buildings right down there. So that's actually interesting to see. Didn't see the BMP earlier in the video. So now the video, you can see it fire again into the buildings. Now the video has fast forwarded a little bit in time, and we can see the BMP is still sitting there firing into the buildings, most likely with a 100mm gun. The BMP actually has 2 guns. It has a 100mm gun and a 30mm autocannon. It appears that it's using the 100mm gun right here, as the explosions are, of course, of a larger size, which does denote a larger caliber. We can now see the BMP reversing out of its position, and it looks like it is now retreating from the field. That doesn't mean that, of course, it's running off. That just means it's leaving the field of battle. So with that is the end of that video. We don't know how much longer the Azov and the 36th Infantry Brigade can hold inside the Azovstal. We don't know their supply situation, their force numbers. We don't know anything like that. So hopefully they can hold for a very long time. Right now they are still holding and defying everyone's odds. The last time the Azov did speak to anyone outside of the factory, they did say it may be the last time they're able to speak to anyone. I'm not sure if that means that they believe their communications will be shut off or if they will be destroyed before the next time they can speak. But nonetheless, the situation is dire for them, and hopefully something can be done or arranged for them to get some kind of supply somehow, although it looks very infeasible, if not impossible, or maybe some kind of attempt can be made to retake the city or relieve the defenders of Mariupol with some kind of external force. So nonetheless, that is all the news we have in the Mariupol area. We're now going to move on down towards Crimea first, because we've actually seen that there has been a serious shift in Russian tactics as far as naval warfare is being conducted. These 2 satellite pictures were taken days apart, one before and one after the sinking of the Moskva. We can see here that we can actually see well, actually, I'm sorry, correction. I believe these 2 pictures are actually the same. Yes, they are. I'm sorry, correction. But they're showing a change in strategy. These docks right here now have Kilo-class submarines, which is what the submarine wing of the Black Sea Fleet is mainly composed of. We can now see 2 of these here within these satellite pictures that are being loaded by crane with what may be caliber cruise missiles. This is telling us that the Russians are now shifting their strategy from firing these cruise missiles by ship, which could be much more susceptible to anti-ship warfare, and now they're shifting the operations of these missiles to submarines, which may suggest that the Moscow has taught them that using their Black Sea Fleet surface fleet assets are incredibly dangerous and not really beneficial to the war effort for them. So it looks like the submarines may be the only ships, I know that's not really an accurate description, but the only ships in the fleet that may be getting any action from here on. So with that, that's the end of that. Really not much to talk about, and I'm not really a big naval buff, so unfortunately I can't really go into a lot about naval operations at all. So we're now going to move on to the area around Kherson, where today we've seen a KH-35 MLRS system, which is apparently some kind of coastal defense vehicle, firing missiles at ground targets in Mykolaiv. So here's the video. So that's the end of that video. As you can see there, It's nothing more than a coastal defense system launching missiles at ground forces at Mykolaiv. We can actually see explosions rocking the city later on, but we'll get to that in a second. Secondly, we've seen in the city of Kherson today that that partisans are starting to make a resurgence in a way, and they're starting to let the Russians and maybe a lot of sympathizers know that they are very close and the Ukrainian army is only a little ways away, and this may lead to their soon demise. So I'm just going to leave that at that, and we're actually going to read this Twitter post, which explains what this says. It says, Russian occupiers and everyone who supports them, we are close, already operating Kherson. Death awaits you all. Kherson is Ukraine. So you can see that the messaging there by these partisans is very ominous, and it is telling the sympathizers that may be within Kherson that their time is nigh, because the Ukrainian forces are only ways away from recapturing the city. The validity of that statement, I'm not entirely sure. We haven't seen the Ukrainians make any progress in actually recapturing Kherson within the past week and a half, which does tell me that that offensive has stalled. There's really no way to get around that. I think that's one of the places that the Ukrainian military is being bogged down. Hopefully they can overcome that soon and actually retake the city, but that will be a very long and pitched battle to do so, because Kherson is vitally important to Russia's future plans if they do wish to carry on this war. And so with that, we've covered all the news in Kherson. We're now going to move on towards Mykolaiv, where we've gotten 2 bits of news today. First off, we can see a controlled detonation right outside of Mykolaiv in this video. The caption says it's a soldier under artillery fire, but after some observation and a lot of reading, this does appear to be a controlled explosion instead. So here's the video. So as you can see right there, controlled explosion. They did say at the end of the video, keep your heads down. So I don't know why they said that, but I did a load of research on that, and I can assure y'all that that was most certainly, if not completely, a controlled detonation of some kind of explosive. And so with that, we're now going to move on inside of the city itself, where we can see that bombs have been falling on Mykolaiv over tonight again. Mykolaiv has been getting hammered over the past few days with artillery and aerial strikes, and we can see that last night was no exception. Unfortunately, the footage is very grainy, but you can see that the barrage is incredibly large. You can see some explosions out in the distance. Seems to be a little bit further away now than the initial strike. And so with that, that is the end of that video. There's not really much to talk about. It was very grainy, so there wasn't really much to make out, rather than there was explosions occurring in Mykolaiv. And so with that, we're now going to move on towards Kryvyi Rih and Bashtanka. Starting off in Bashtanka, we can see that the clinic inside of the city has been destroyed by Russian fire. It, of course, is not a battlefield as far as we know, although we do know that earlier on in the war, a breakthrough convoy actually made it as far as Bashtanka and then was promptly destroyed. But nonetheless, right here, we can see that some kind of artillery fire most likely has destroyed this clinic, as the caption did say on this Reddit post. So with that, that's the end of that video. You can see that the damage to the clinic was severe. And so we're just going to leave that at that. Not much to say. Hopefully there wasn't a lot of people killed or injured in that bombardment. And so we're finally going to move towards Kryvyi Rih, where we can actually see the Ukrainians giving the Russians some of their own medicine in the area, as they too are firing off their MLRSs towards an assumed Russian target somewhere off in this area. But it was stated that this footage was taken somewhere in the area of Kryvyi Rih. So as you can see, this MLRS is well at work, firing off its load of missiles towards Russian targets, hopefully to hit them dead on. And so with that, that is the end of that video. Not really much to talk about there. And so we're now going to move on outside of Ukraine, and we're now going to talk about the little bit of international news we've gotten, both in the form of what happened in Moscow and also in Norway. To start off in Norway, we've heard today that the Norwegians will be sending 100 Mistral anti-air defense systems, manpads in particular, to Ukraine. These are incredibly effective, apparently with a success rate of 93%, which is incredibly high for a manpad defense system, and also apparently has a 3-kilogram high explosive warhead. Well, warhead, not really, but an explosive. But nonetheless, incredibly interesting. I'm, of course, not an expert on this stuff. I'm not really one to get into the nitty-gritty details. If it's a gun, it shoots. If it's a tank, it fires. If it's a infantryman, it lives. So, there's not really much you need to know beyond that. You can always get into the details and hair split and stuff. But really, honestly, everything is really the same on the overall, on the whole. You can get little minor improvements out of things, but honestly, if you have a Stinger, I'm going to assume that a Stinger would operate much like this Mistral and probably have a slightly similar a success rate in a way. But anyways, with that, not going to talk about that too much. You can see right there the manpad system in particular apparently can also be vehicle mounted, or it could be carried and shoulder fired. Anyways, we're now going to move on to the last bit of news, where we can see that someone has apparently gotten in the Reddit spirit in Moscow today as some kind of higher up Russian. I'm not really sure if he's a government official or just higher up in fame or popularity. He has released a very long essay about why he thinks the renewed offensive in the Donbas will not go incredibly well. Apparently, there are translations here as well that we can read, but nonetheless, that's incredibly too long, and I don't want to start a reading rainbow thing here today. So, if you would like, there is a link to the link in the description to the map where you can read this yourself in its entirety. I made sure to include that for y'all to see. Also, if you did enjoy this video so far, make sure to like, because it does help us out a lot with the analytics and it helps more people see this. So if you have enjoyed it, make sure to click like. The more likes we get, the more people this reaches, and the more people can hear this news. So I thank you all once again for watching the news. The stream hasn't ended yet. Just for people who think I'm ending the stream, it hasn't ended. We're about to move on to the questions, though. So if you have asked a question, either through Super Chat or Live Chat, we're about to get to him right now, so stick around and see if you are one of the lucky people who were picked from the Live Chat. And so with that, we're now going to move on to the questions. So what do we got first, Matthew?
All right, so we have quite a few Super Chats that have come in right now. We currently have about 20 to 25 to get to, as well as quite a few Live Chat questions. So first up, we have a $100 donation from a longtime channel supporter, Naria, who says, regarding the price of the ruble, I would ask, hasn't trade of rubles and currency exchange has been restricted or suspended, so the current price is not a free market price?
Very interesting. I have heard that, and I've heard that apparently all of the debt that they're incurring right now will default on May 4th or the 5th. So that is something interesting to know, and I thank you once again for the huge support. But to answer that, as far as I can tell, it is currency manipulation, but right now, compared to the previous times that economic sanctions have hit the ruble, such as in 2008 and 2014, the value dropped and it never rebounded. I don't know if this is something new that they're trying to make sure that the ruble just doesn't drop through the floor like it looks like it will be doing, but nonetheless, that is something interesting to take note of. I'm not really an economics expert or a currency manipulation expert. I do know that the Chinese have been claimed to do that a large amount with the Chinese yuan. But nonetheless, I thank you very much for the support, and I hope I did answer that question at least in a way. And I do thank you very much for the huge amount of support and the return support you've given. It does help to run this channel to a huge degree, and we're very appreciative of it. So thank you once again, and with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
All right, and up next we have another $100 donation from channel supporter Devin Gray, who says, Dury Ridge Free State Armory LLC says, glory to Ukraine.
Well, thank you very much, and Slava Ukraini. And can you give me the name of that again, real quick?
He said, the Dury Ridge Free State Armory.
Let's pull that up. Dury Ridge Free State Armory. Give these guys a shout out. Drury Ridge, Free State. This looks like the place. Free State Gun Range. Interesting. I don't know where this is, but shout out to them. Thank you very much for the support, and it does help us out a very good bit on continuing to run this channel. And so with that, we're now going to move on to the next question.
And next up, we have another donation from Stephen Mentier, who puts in another $68 and says, "Thank you for your channel, Enforcer. You bring light to a country in darkness. The USA and Ukraine and her NATO allies will save and defend Ukraine 100%. Captain America to the rescue."
Well, I thank you very much for the support and the little euphemism you gave there about Captain America. But yes, I can agree that it looks like Ukraine is getting less and less attention in the news and really all over. A lot of people have stopped paying attention to it, but nonetheless, I made a promise at the beginning of these streams that I would continue running these streams every single day until the end of the war. And I want to be around when the end of this war comes. And I want to say that I was here talking about this war every single day, well, except for Mondays now. Now I cover that on Tuesday, but nonetheless, I want to just do this because I'm a person of my word. When I say I'll do something, I'm going to do it, regardless if it's going on and people stop paying attention. I will still be here, and I will still be reporting this news until this war is over. So I thank you very much for appreciating that, and I thank you so much for the support, because it does help us to continue to do this well into the future. And so I thank you so much once again, and with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And up next, we have a $25 donation from Joe, who says, "I was thinking the same thing about the guy's helmet. It made his face even more of a target. Great job as always, y'all."
Yeah, I mean, like, the guy, every time he would talk, he would lift the helmet up off his forehead like it helped him talk. I don't know why. It was really goofy and dumb looking, but then again, that seems like a really goofy guy to be over there with the Russians acting like they're the ones on the right. You gotta think about the mental stability of those kind of people when you are watching their videos. So I don't really think the guy's in the right state of mind anyways, and that just further goes to show that he may be mentally unstable to do something as goofy and nonsensical as that. But anyways, I thank you very much for the support, and I thank you very much for noticing that as well. And so with that, we're gonna move on to the next question.
And next question is from Anna May, who puts in a $20 donation and says, "Thank you for your coverage."
And I thank you so much for watching. Of course, I would be doing this regardless of how well it was going, but I do thank y'all all so much for still paying attention, supporting on the Sunday fundraisers, the charitable causes that we have found and selected, and just continuing to be here. It's wonderful. And once again, it is really cool, going back to that Reddit post, that there's been a culture that's built up around this channel to the point that people are so proud of it and they like it so much that they actually go and advertise it now elsewhere, which I never thought would ever happen. I remember I did that when this was a gaming channel, actually. A lot of y'all weren't, well, all of y'all weren't around for that probably, but I used to be a gaming channel before I did this, and I was trying to figure out some way to make it on YouTube. And I didn't really like gaming. I did current events before, and I'll actually upload those videos again if y'all want to see them. They were it took a lot of time to make them, but they weren't really high quality, if you know what I mean. But they did talk about some interesting stuff. One of them talked about the fall of Afghanistan and like the entire history of the nation from start to finish. And then the other one talked about the riots in Hong Kong, and it was a much shorter video because it took so long to make them. But I started off doing that. I didn't really like it. I didn't really like the direction it was going in because no one watched them and no one really cared about what I was making. Each one only got 100 views. So I was like, that's not really great. So I went on to make gaming videos afterwards, and those didn't do well either. And so I was like, well, YouTube isn't cut out for me. And so after that, I was playing Train Sim. Probably a lot of y'all have heard this story before, but I was playing Train Sim, and I was in the middle of it on February 24th at around 10 p.m. Eastern time, I think. And someone came onto my live chat and said, "Hey, dude, the Russians have started launching ballistic missiles into Ukraine, and they're blowing up on their targets right now." And I said, "Oh my God, is that for real?" And so I pulled it up, and it was. And so I said, "Oh my God, everyone, Ukraine is just going to war. Well, Russia has just gone to war with Ukraine." And so I said, "I'm going to end this stream, and I'm going to start up a new one, and we're going to talk about it." And so I ended that stream, and then 5 minutes later, I turned on the first stream about the Ukraine war that I ever made. And you can actually still find it, still on the channel. It's Russia Invades Ukraine, First Hours of the War. That's the title of the video. It's literally the first one that's on the channel right now. And so you can actually go and take a look at the amateur work I did back then, covering the news. It was hardly detailed at all. And you can actually see kind of the evolution within the first week of how I covered the news and how much more detailed and elaborate it got. And then it just kind of got to this format. And this is stuck for weeks because this is about as detailed as I can make it without making it overcomplicated. So I thank you so much for the support. And of course, it does. The support does help us to continue to run this channel, and I hope y'all enjoyed the little tidbit of a small life story I got there of how this channel has gotten to this point. But I thank you once again, nonetheless, and we're going to move on to the next question.
And up next, we have a $20 donation from Zeta Lane, who says, "No news is good news. If it's about the Donbas, here's some coin for your coffee fund to celebrate, and here I am, Slava."
Slava Ukraini, and thank you so much for the support once again. And I can't agree that no news is good news, but the thing that's concerning about this no news is that there is this huge offensive going on by the Russians right now, and so it is kind of weird. It's not like there's nothing going on. There's a lot going on right now all over this front line. Yet there's no news coming out, which is kind of concerning to me. But hopefully that just means that it's going well for the Ukrainians and that they are holding. So I thank you so much for the support once again, Zeta Lane. You've been here for a long time, and it's good to have you back. And so thank you once again, and we're going to move on to the next question.
And next up, we have a $20 donation from Alex Ambrose, who says, "Speaking of Rusist traitors, have you heard anything about Gonzalo Lira? He's another American mouthpiece for Putin in Ukraine who went missing, and some pro-Russian YouTubers are screaming that evil Azov Nazis got him."
I actually haven't heard about that guy. I don't really follow on the traitor drama. Really, I don't really consider those people to be Americans anymore. They're pretty much betraying the United States and its international interests. Because while it's always good to weigh in on the humanitarian things, this war has a lot to do with the United States' global interests. This is a large European country in Eastern Europe where we're trying to still grow a base of power, and it's currently being threatened directly by our international rival, the Russian Federation. So, moving beyond it's not right for Russia to invade, this is directly tied into America's national interests, and so anyone who sides with the Russians that is an American who is apparently too ignorant to understand that America must protect its international interests wherever they be and side with the Russians are not really Americans. They're really traitors. And so, with that being said, that's kind of my opinion and weighing in. So, unfortunately, I don't really know about that guy. I don't follow on them too much. I just watch that guy here and there because I bust out laughing at how goofy he is. But nonetheless, thank you very much for the support. Hope that answers the question in a way. And with that being said, we're going to move on to the next one.
And next up, we have a $20 donation from Three-Eyed Raven, who says, "Check out M4 WAC-47, Ukraine-made M4 chambered in AK and AKM. It uses the same clips and circa 2017. How do you think the Russian arms market will be affected by their performance? It is a major part of their economy."
Very interesting. I think I may need you to read out that last part about important to the economy and the Russians part again real quick because I was pulling up the gun itself. So could you read that back to me real quick?
So they say, how do you think the Russian arms market will be affected by their performance, referring to the M4 there, and they say it is a major part of their economy.
Very interesting question. It does appear that it is a Ukrainian origin gun, like you said, and it appears that the only operators of it are the Ukrainian ground forces and the border guards of Ukraine. So I don't really know how that would affect the Russian economy, considering that this looks like an entirely Ukrainian domestic affair, and it doesn't really involve a lot of the Russians on the outside of things. So I don't really think it'll affect their economy far too much. But that is interesting to know that the Ukrainians are manufacturing their own version of the M4, which is chambered in 7.62 by 39. Kind of weird to me, though, because I thought most AKs are of the AK-74 kind, which means they use 5.45 by 39. But nonetheless, you know, I may not know a lot about the calibers and the availability of ammunition inside of Ukraine, and that may have led them to use the 7.62 by 39 cartridge just because it may have been more readily available. But nonetheless, I do think that that is very interesting. I did not know that, and that may explain in some videos why we see the Ukrainians using M4s, because they're actually using a widely available cartridge inside of Ukraine. So I thank you very much for the support, and I hope that did answer the question. Unfortunately, I really can't answer the Russian economy part because I don't really know how it would affect it, but thank you nonetheless, and we're now going to move on to the next question.
And up next, we have an $18 donation from Andrew J., who says, does the Neptune missiles range now make the Sevastopol naval base unusable by the Russian Navy? Are there any indications it's not being used?
Let's check that real quick. From the closest part on the Ukrainian coast, 150 miles out is nearly at Sevastopol. That 150 miles, and I believe that's the maximum range of their current anti-ship missiles. So not quite. It's close, but not exactly. It appears that if they did have a 150-mile range on these anti-ship missiles, that they are going to be defending a radius around the Black Sea that spans all the way out nearly to be parallel with Bucharest in Romania, which is a long distance. So it appears that, honestly, if the Russian Navy is still operating out of Sevastopol, which I believe they are, they will have to leave port and then immediately head south around this horn here that's called the Kursaneski Mayak, and then head directly south into the Black Sea and maybe to the Azov Sea or hang out down here somewhere. But nonetheless, they can't get close to Odessa or that coastline at all anymore if the anti-ship missiles do have that kind of range. So I do believe that they're probably using Sevastopol, considering that it's not directly within the range of those anti-ship missiles. But I do thank you very much for the support, and I hope that does answer the question, at least in a way. And so I thank you very much once again, and we're going to move on to the next question.
And real quick, I want to recognize an $18 donation from Feklar7. Thank you very much for your support of the channel. We appreciate it. Up next, we have a $15 donation from very long time channel supporter S. Moore, who says, Marvelous Meredith, a blue-eyed sockeye, is now speaking for the Salmon Nation. She is spreading the word, the enforcer. More news coming from the Pacific.
Well, I thank you very much for the support, and it's good to know that we do have fishy friends in the Pacific Ocean that are promoting our channel under the sea. Hopefully we can get a little song about that. Anyways, I thank you very much for the support. I see that Sylvia has gotten an immediate replacement. Apparently the line of succession is incredibly strong in the Salmon Nation, and so I can't wait to hear the wonderful questions that this new representative of the Sockeye Nation will be asking me. So I thank you very much once again for the support, and with that being said, we're going to move on to the next question.
And up next, we have a $12 donation from Level 70, who says, will NATO enter the war if Russia uses a tactical nuke?
Yes, we will. The United States has made it clear that any kind of biological, chemical, or nuclear attacks will lead to direct U.S. involvement, and direct U.S. involvement can only mean one thing, which means that we actually involve forces inside of this war in Ukraine and maybe across the entire NATO front line that we share with the, let me make sure I get the name right, CSTO. Let me pull that up just to make sure. CSTO. Yes, I am correct. The CISTO. That's what I call it. But nonetheless, I believe that would lead us directly into a war with the CISTO countries, which would include Belarus and Russia, and I believe some other countries further out this way. Maybe Kazakhstan, I'm not entirely sure. But I thank you so much for the support. That is kind of like the answer in brief. We've answered that question a load on this channel. It's an incredibly common question that's on a lot of people's minds, and although we've answered it a lot, I'm never afraid to answer it again, because a lot of people want to know some kind of answer about that, and that's kind of where I'm standing right now. The U.S. would get involved at that point, and, excuse me, I believe rightfully so. We do have a vested interest for multiple reasons in protecting Ukraine, and so I believe that it is totally within and completely within our right to make sure that if any kind of chemical, nuclear, or biological weapons are used, that we do get directly involved there. So I thank you so much for the support. Hope that does answer the question, and with that being said, we're going to move on to the next one.
And up next, we have a $10 donation from Tito McLovin, who says, how long will it be before game makers name a map Mariupol? The Second Battle of Fallujah ended in 2004, but 18 years later, we still have no 6 days of Fallujah game. Will they give Mariupol the same respect?
I don't know if they will. I know the exact game you're talking about, and actually, I think Squad, if y'all have ever played Squad, it's a fun game. I actually have a lot of friends who play them. They're British, and they're great friends. I'm incredibly grateful of them being friends. Unfortunately, we never get the time to play at the same time because they're on British time. I'm on American time, and when they hop on, I'm starting to work on this stuff, or when they're hopping off, I'm starting to like get around to doing this thing. So I never get the time to do anything in squad with them. But nonetheless, I think that was kind of the spiritual successor to that game because they now have a Fallujah map. I'm not really sure if they're going to do anything with Mariupol. Of course, there is kind of a time frame where things seem to be a bad taste, so that may be way down the road. But speaking of video games, I would like to say to everyone and kind of give a plug to a little game that I just got a while ago because I heard it was Ukrainian, and I do want to support Ukrainian developers and companies as much as I can right now. There was actually a little game on Steam called Ostriv, and it's a really cool little game. It's actually a Ukrainian village management game that is based in the 1700s in, like, I guess you could call it provincial Ukraine, where you pretty much run this little Ukrainian village from the start. When you have like 24 people and you have to like get them out of tents and into actual houses, and then beyond that you have to expand the village from there. It is an incredibly fun little game. I would show it on stream. Let me know if y'all would like to see it real quick, a little snippet, and I'll show y'all what I've done so far in it. It's really cool, and I highly suggest if y'all would like to support Ukrainian video game developers to go buy that game. I feel like y'all would enjoy it a lot, although it is slightly expensive at $24. But I thank you nonetheless for the question. I'll actually put up a little poll in the chat to see if anyone wants to see that game. But while we do that, I thank you once again, and we're going to move on to the next question.
And up next, we have a $100 donation from Mike Smith, who says, Jameson time, I recommend Black Barrel.
Golly, I thank you so much for the support, and I will try and take a Jameson break as soon as possible, of course, when it is legal. So I thank you very much for the support. It does help out this channel a great deal, and it does help us to continue doing what we do, and I'm very grateful that you do appreciate it. And so with that being said, we're going to move on to the next question.
And up next, we have an $18 donation from Russ Paulus, who says, would it be ridiculous to think that someone could capture Putin's daughters and use them as negotiating pieces? Hopefully receiving my Enforcer mug soon.
Well, I thank you very much for the support. And to start off with the mug and then circle back to the daughters here in a second, I thank you so much for buying a mug and merchandise in general. The merchandise is actually turning out to be much higher quality than I was originally going into this thinking it was going to be. I've never seen Teespring products before I did this, so I was kind of going into this with mixed feelings. I never try and get a bias on anything. I'm like, it could be good looking, it could be terrible. I've got to wait to see the end result. So I actually went and bought some sample stuff. I bought a phone case, a mug, and a t-shirt. The t-shirt came in, and it is good. It looks really good. The mug came in, and it's got this beautiful little sheen on it. They did the print job on that incredibly well. You can't even feel the place where the print is put onto the mug. It's that good, and they're beautiful. I mean, like, designs were incredible. I love them so much. And then the phone case came in, and that was incredibly good as well, and I like the quality of it on top of everything. So I've got to say, I'm incredibly pleased with the quality of the merchandise beyond just it being channel supporting and stuff like that. It's got to be good quality. I'm not wanting to sell garbage to y'all. That wouldn't make any sense. And I don't hold myself to that standard where I sell off scammy garbage. I like it to be good quality, and I'm very happy with the quality of it so far. To answer the question about the daughters, I just don't know about the daughters, because we know that they're not in Russia. I think I heard that one of them was in Switzerland. And Switzerland is a very weird place. Switzerland is neutral. Most of the time, they're not neutral right now. They're actually picking a side, and they're actually sanctioning the Russians as well. So I don't know if anything like that would happen, but I don't think the Swiss would perpetrate it. Of course, the Swiss are just violently neutral. I think it would be a external power that would try to do that, but most Western countries would not stoop down to that level, because I think even citizens within countries like Britain, France, Germany, or the United States would highly look down and frown upon the decision to kidnap Putin's daughters if they're both inside of Switzerland. So with the answer to that question, I'm actually looking at the poll here, and let me check. We have 315 votes in. And 82% of y'all actually want to see Ostriv, which is bizarre. I didn't think anyone would want to see a game on stream, but nonetheless, y'all do. So I'm going to end that poll, and I'm going to pop up the little game real quick because it's really cool, and I think you'll all enjoy seeing it for just a second, but we're not going to hang out on it too long. So as you can see, there's like little Ukrainian patterns in the loading screen. I like it. It's really neat, you know? But we're going to move back to the questions here in a second. I'm going to make this very brief because I don't want the stream to become Forrest Gump length exactly. But anyways, we're going to continue the last game I had up. Oh, are you kidding me? Did it crash? Oh, come on. It's still in alpha phase, so I think my last game may have crashed. Let me go and see if I can load up an older one, because apparently something happened to my current village that is making it not work. So give me just a second, y'all. We're going to make sure that we can get in here and show it to y'all at least a little. The file is corrupted, so let's see when this one was. Okay, this one was taking just a few minutes before. We'll load that one. It's not corrupted. So to answer a question from James Ortiz, Ostriv is a little Ukrainian village building game that is based around pretty much Ukrainian culture. As you can see here, the little like dachas, I guess you could call them, are Ukrainian in their design. Incredibly neat. Each little citizen is mapped out and they have their own little tasks and functions. You have to build the city from the ground up. Everything that you see here has to have the resources gathered from somewhere. So there's clay pits, you know, and all kinds of things. You have to do a million things to build these little village houses. But nonetheless, it's an incredibly interesting and fun game to sit down and just play. And of course, you are supporting a Ukrainian game developer getting it. Also, the little background music is pretty cool as well. So, you know something I was thinking, if a lot of y'all wanted to see it, we'll run a poll on this as well. I may stream something like this in the future, of course, after the finals are over, in the middle of the day. You know, just because I like to play games, but I also probably do it on another channel because I don't want it to be on my news channel. But I'll let y'all know about that, and we'll also run a little poll on it. But once again, go check this game out if you like city building and just, you know, having a relaxing time playing the game. If you're one of those people who like Farming Simulator or something, this is probably the game for you. It's incredibly fun. I've had a lot of fun with it. This is what I've been doing in my free time in between making the videos and doing college stuff. And you can see that the towns come together incredibly well. In fact, I even got a little church here like that. Anyways, I'm going to end this real quick so that way we're not running this on for way too long. It's a good thing that the save loaded. I was kind of scared that I lost the entire thing. But nonetheless, going to get off of that. And so I hope y'all did get a nice little glimpse of Ostriv. It's an incredibly cool little game. But with that being said, we're going to move on to the next question.
And up next, we have a $20 donation from Larry Womack, who says, "Can't we send our special forces after Putin and take him out?"
Good question. But the scary thing about sending in special forces is that if they ever get caught, I don't know if the Russians would. Of course, their budget's really small, so I don't know if they'd be able to do this. But what if they actually have an account and a list of all of the Russian special forces, their faces, and such things like that from the United States? It is a possibility, because in the Cold War, the Russians actually had so many spies out and about in the Western world that they actually made maps that were more accurate of places like London than the actual British made of the city itself. So you got to think they may have a list of these special forces operatives, and if they were captured in some kind of operation in Russia, they could be directly identified as pretty much American special forces that have entered as civilians or trying to look like they're up to nothing, but they really are up to everything you could imagine. And, you know, of course, trying to kill Putin. And that could, of course, drag us into a war, which is something that we really don't want. But we're not looking like we're afraid to enter at this point. So it's a good idea on paper, but the implications of it going wrong is very scary. So I thank you very much for the support. I hope that does answer the question in a way. And so with that, we're going to move on to the next question. But before we do, how many Super Chats do we have left?
So let's see here. We have about 15 to 20 left.
All right, so we're actually going to put a cutoff on the Super Chats for the night. I thank you all so much for the support. So if you put in a Super Chat beyond this point, we won't really be able to answer the question because we're going to try and keep this as short as possible. But if you would like to support the channel, make sure to get some merchandise if you would like to support us some way and get something out of it. Merchandise is incredibly nice, once again, and I highly recommend it if you would like to support the channel and show it to your friends. But I thank you all so much for the support once again, but we're going to have to put a cutoff on the Super Chats for tonight. So we're going to answer the rest of them, and then we're going to get to the questions from the live chat. And so with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And up next, we have an $18 donation from Andrew J., who says, in all caps, the Neptune missile can reach Sevastopol from the border near Moldova.
Really? Let's check that. Let's check that real quick. If it's 150 miles, not quite. Hang on. Maybe it's down here. Maybe it's down here in this nature reserve. Yeah, because I think the range of that thing would have to be like 200 miles. But if that is true, if it can reach it from there, I think that the future of the Black Sea Fleet being based in Sevastopol may be at risk, and they may have to actually look at trying to rebase them. Although I don't know where they would go. I mean, like Kerch has a port, but it's a smaller port, and I'm sure that there's not a military naval installation there of a large enough size to house the entire Black Sea Fleet. So that's going to be something we're going to have to watch out for in the next few days and see what the Russians do in response to that. But I thank you so much for the support and also sharing that info with us. And so with that being said, we're going to move on to the next question.
And up next, I want to recognize a $10 donation from Mark Sova. Thank you very much for your support of the channel. Up next, we have a $10 donation from Not a Teacher, who says, I understand if you don't want to answer, but how old are you guys? I can't tell by your voices. Matt sounds like my dad, and he was born in the 60s. Well, I'll answer for myself real quickly. I don't mind saying I'm 21 years old, and I'm in college. I'm a senior at the moment, about to graduate. So I'm not a dad, but I guess thank you.
Also, to answer the question on my part, I've said this a couple of times on stream, but then again, a lot of people have a bias against me in my reporting just because I don't have prior military experience, and so I don't want to like have too many strikes against me. But I am only 20 years old. I am a junior, starting into my senior year next semester here at college, so I'm actually pretty young. But I do find it very interesting and neat, and it's not rude. I just saw someone say Straw Hat said, how rude. It's not that rude. You can ask. But yeah, I'm 20 years old, and I'm a junior in college, about to become a senior. So if that surprises y'all, it surprises a lot of people. When a lot of people see me in person, they actually think I'm up in my 30s for some reason. I look incredibly old, but I thank you very much for the question. It wasn't rude. Some people are thinking that is rude, but yeah, I thank you very much for the support. Hope that does answer it pretty plainly. And so with that being said, we're going to move on to the next question.
All right, and next up we have a $10 donation from 21 Grams, who says, I just love how people all over the world join these chats. Thank you, Enforcer.
I can't agree. It's a very incredible thing that we have an international community here on this channel. We have Ukrainians watching, we have Americans watching, of course, we have New Zealanders, Australians, Indians, Pakistanis, Norwegians, Finns, Swedes, everyone under the sun that I can think of. We even actually have a few Russians that I know of, and I've seen those here and there, but they're incredibly rare. But nonetheless, I just gotta say, it really is something to me, because it's crazy to think of the international reach this channel has, and I don't let it skip by me any day that I'm running it. I'm like, there's hundreds of thousands of people that have gotten, well, actually millions at this point, millions of views on this channel, and a lot of them are from all around the world trying to get the same questions answered, and it's really something to me. And I've got to say, I appreciate every single one of y'all who comes here and watches my streams, and I'm incredibly honored that out of all the streams you could be watching, you're watching mine. So thank you all once again, and I thank you very much for the support. And with that being said, we're going to move on to the next question.
And real quickly, I just want to mention something, because this was kind of interesting to me. Maybe somebody can fact check it. Somebody says that the U.S. Capitol was evacuated today due to threat of aircraft that was being tracked. I'm not sure if that's accurate or not.
Let me check that real quick. U.S. Army parachute demo at Nats Park causes false alarm. So apparently it was some kind of a freak out. Apparently the U.S. Army didn't coordinate with the air defense perimeter around Washington, D.C., and they thought that an unidentified aircraft was flying into the restricted airspace around the Capitol. So that's actually an incredibly interesting story. I wish I had covered that, but I actually didn't hear about it. But I thank you very much for bringing that up, Matthew. That was something interesting. And it looks like we did get a quick little answer to that real quick. So with that being said, on to the next question.
So the next question is from G. Hill, who puts in a $10 donation and says, Ukrainian commander in Mariupol pleads for extraction. So how does that work, and how is that even possible? Thanks for all you guys do, and this is a very informative stream.
And I thank you so much for the support and enjoying the stream. I try and make sure that the news is as informational as possible, and every once in a while I try and add in some commentary that may be informative or maybe just entertaining. Once again, I'm not an expert on everything, so sometimes I can only make my commentary entertaining in a way, because there's not really much for me to add in certain situations. But to answer your question about the commander of the Azov asking for evacuation, I don't know how that will work, and I don't really know if he is asking for evacuation, but let's just assume, for the sake of that question, he is. I don't really know how exactly that would occur, considering that they would have to find some way to get him out of the Azovstal and through the city, if it was by ground, or fly a helicopter in there, land it somewhere in a suitable location in the Azovstal without getting shot down, pick him up, and then take him out. I just don't really know about that, so unfortunately I'm going to have to kind of plead ignorance, because I think the situation of evacuating him is kind of impossible if he did request that. But nonetheless, I do hope that answered the question, at least in brief, and I thank you so much for the support once again. And so with that being said, we're going to move on to the next question.
And up next, we have a $10 donation from Beck Tex, who says, the ruble has rebounded because it's not being traded. It's not being used to buy imports, and obviously nobody outside of Russia is trading for rubles, so the exchange rate is irrelevant.
Interesting. I thank you very much for the input there. I think, though, that the Germans are still buying a large amount of Russian oil, because if they don't, their power grid will fail. So I think that there are foreign countries that are currently buying Russian oil, and I believe there was a point, although I haven't gotten a lot into the Russian economic situation during this war beyond the sanctioning processes that the world has gone through against them. But as far as I know, the Russians demanded that the payments for the oil that Germany will have to make would have to be made in rubles. But then again, I'm not an expert on that. That's kind of like maybe fragmented information on my part. So I thank you very much for sharing that info. I really don't have enough to agree with it or disagree with it as far as knowledge on the subject, but I do thank you very much for sharing that and the support as well. And so with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And next up, we have a $10 donation from Wrath FL, who says, what kind of anti-missile system is needed to protect Kiev and other cities? Keep up the great work.
I don't really know what kind of this is kind of like the thing I went over with guns the other day. Like a lever action versus an AR-15 or an M4 or something like that. It's it's kind of a tough thing to answer, because I don't really know what kind of missile defense system Kyiv would need. A lot of people say the Patriot defense system is an incredibly good system, which I can agree with. A lot of people say the Iron Dome system is incredibly effective. I can agree with that as well. I just don't really know which one would actually fit the goal that they're going for. But nonetheless, a missile protection system around most of their major cities like Lviv, Kyiv, Kharkiv, Poltava, Dnipro, Zaporizhia, Kryvyi Rih, and Mykolaiv would be incredibly beneficial and important to try and have in place. I don't know if the Ukrainians have a budget for that, or if any nations or the companies within these countries would be able to oblige an order of such size and magnitude encompassing such a large area around the country. Because if you put the actual cities together here in Ukraine, and you compare that to the size of Israel, I'm assuming that the metropolitan areas of these cities probably are larger than the area of Israel itself, which is entirely protected by an Iron Dome system. So I thank you so much for the support, but unfortunately I can't answer the specifics of the question, what would be the most effective missile protection system for Kyiv. So I thank you once again. I hope that did answer the question. And with that being said, we're going to move on to the next one.
And up next, we have a $10 donation from Hoodoo, Texas, who says, using dollars here, not rubles. The ruble is not stabilized. It is frozen by Russian artificial currency controls. Of course, propagandists are saying that it's recovered, and it hasn't.
Well, thank you very much for the support and saying that. We've actually gotten a lot of super chats tonight saying that, which I would have to, of course, believe is making it true. Not that saying something enough times makes it true. It's just that so many people are stating the same information that has to be the case. And of course, a lot of people are saying that will all reverse itself on May 4th, I believe, when the debts default. And then that will lead a lot into question, really the future of the Russian country, the Russian state in general. If their economy collapses, there's not really much left to a country beyond its economy, really. because money is how the world works in a way, especially on the governmental level. So I thank you so much for the info. We have gotten that multiple times tonight, and I thank you very much for verifying and adding to it. So thank you once again, and we're going to move on to the next question.
And up next, we have a $10 donation from Greg Carmen, who says, "Thank you for the continuing info, trying to contribute as I can, and prayers for Ukraine."
Well, I thank you very much for the support, and I'm glad that you do enjoy the channel. And also, I send out prayers to Ukraine every single day. I, of course, still have a friend over there, and hopefully he's okay. I haven't checked on him in a bit because I've been so freaking busy. But nonetheless, I'm probably going to try and check on him because he just crossed my mind again. And I've talked about him a good bit, but it's just that, you know, it's hard to check on people because there's so little time. But I'm going to go check on him because I want to know if he's all right. I think, as far as I know, he lived near Kyiv, and he actually left Kyiv to head towards the western side of the country and get out of the war. So hopefully he is safe and okay. But I thank you very much for the support, and I hope that does address the comments in a way. And with that being said, we're going to move on to the next question.
And up next, we have a $10 donation from Ron Edwards, who says, "If you like Patrick, I can't wait for you to comment on the Duran on YouTube. Please watch and comment."
I will try and make sure to do that. And not on stream tonight because I feel like we're actually going to be going way over time right now. But I do thank you very much for the recommendation, and I will try and take a look at him, because if this guy is a clown and you're saying that the other guy is even a more entertaining, hilarious clown, then I'll definitely have to take a look at him as well. So I thank you so much for the support and the recommendation, and with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And up next, we have a $10 donation from Alex Ambrose again, who says, "What is your opinion on these pro-Russian weirdos in the U.S. still trying to defend Russia and its war crimes? Why do you think they do it?"
I mean, honestly, I don't really know. I've actually that's not like a specifically political party line thing, so I kind of feel okay answering it. I've seen people on both sides of the political spectrum saying pro-Russian things. If you go to the left side, it's the communists. If you go to the far right side, it is another group of people, kind of like the conspiracy theory people, if you want to call them that. But nonetheless, to answer that question, I don't even know. I don't even know why they support the Russia. I don't know. I don't know why people have kind of made it in the vogue on both sides to kind of hate the country in a way. It doesn't really make a lot of sense to me. And to kind of weigh in on a little bit of my political opinion, although it's not going to get too controversial. Republicans and Democrats, both in their own ways, think that they're trying to improve the country. You can't get beyond that. Democrats think that their policies are going to make the country better. Republicans believe that they're going to make the country better. So I don't know why it's become the modern day fashion to say that the other party is actively trying to destroy the country. It's just that they're not. Neither of them are. It's just that one of them is trying to have a different way of fixing the country than the other. And I feel like political discourse at this point has become nothing more than a sludge fest. There's really not a lot to it. There's not a lot of common sense in it anymore. Back in the 90s and the early 2000s, there was a lot of common sense to it. People didn't really care about what party you were in. It was kind of just a thing. You were either a Democrat or a Republican, and they're just like, oh, whatever. And you just voted for what you voted for. And these politicians that were in charge weren't trying to pit their people against the other group of people. They were just like, these are my policies. The other guy's got something different, but I think mine will do better. And that's really the way politics ought to be looked at, even here in the United States. So I thank you very much for the support. And to get back to the final answer about those pro-Russian people, I think they're just misguided. I don't think they understand the actual situation in the world and what's going on, and that may be leading them to support the Russians. Hopefully, they can get educated on what's actually going on and actually get a better idea of it. But I thank you very much for the support, and I hope that does answer the question and give you all maybe a little bit of a better idea as to maybe some of my opinions on the modern American political situation, at least. So I thank you very much for the support, and with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And up next, we have a $10 donation from Rich Hogan, who says, "Misguided is a polite word for that reporter. And while he was waving his hands around, he was totally exposed. What a muppet."
I gotta agree. What a muppet. Also, to address some things in the chat, about the political stuff, there are some people saying and I knew this was going to happen whenever I said anything about it. Well, one party tried to overthrow the government, and then the other side, yeah, but the other party is currently destroying the government. Listen, yeah, both parties have done stupid stuff, but I think that's because they're getting highly charged and polarized by the people in charge right now. And you can't not say that's the case. It's like that on both sides. All right, so I'm just going to leave that at that. I'm not going to get into my opinions too much on politics. I don't weigh in on American politics, but that's kind of my neutral, unbiased look at what American politics have turned into in the modern day. So we're just going to leave it at that, and we're now going to move on to the next question.
And we have another $10 donation from Rich Hogan, who says, keep up the great work, and just got my merch in the mail, and it looks great.
And I thank you so much for the support, and I'm glad that you do enjoy and like the quality of the merch. I'm very happy with it as well, and I do think that you'll get a lot of use out of the mug if you got a mug. I've been using my mug to drink my coffee every night. It's just that I don't want to talk about it too much, although I've talked about it a bit in this stream, because I don't like doing merciless plugs for the stuff. It seems kind of tacky, but nonetheless, a lot of people have been talking about it, so now I'm talking about it because I'm like, wow, they really like it, and I'm really happy with it. So I thank you so much for the support, and with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And next up, we have a $10 donation from Manix on the Air, who says, my blind brother loves listening to your streams. Keep up the good work, and thanks for narrating the actions in many videos you cover. I can't wait to get my Leaf Spring merch in the mail.
Well, I thank you very much for the support, and that's something I've never really thought about, is that my commentary actually may help out the blind, you know, and like actually understanding what's going on, because they hear a bit of the audio, and they also hear me describing what's going on, and I've never actually thought about it in that way. That's something that was kind of not really intentional, but is a very good side effect of me actually talking through the videos and explaining what's going on. So I'm very glad that he does enjoy it. Let him know that I'm very glad that he's also a supporter of the channel as well, if he is listening right now. Thank you so much for enjoying the channel. Of course, I'm very happy for everyone who watches it, and I'm glad that my commentary can actually help folks like you who can't see actually hear and know what's going on in these videos. So thank you so much once again for the support. It does mean a lot. And with that being said, we're going to move on to the next question.
And up next, we have a $10 donation from Andy Williams, who says, did you see the video of the AirPods stolen that were tracked back to Moscow? Now we need to figure out how to get each battalion AirTags.
That's a very good idea. The Apple AirTags are something that I actually watched a YouTube video on, and I actually watched a guy put them into envelopes, and he shipped them to SpaceX, Google headquarters. Well, I think Apple headquarters and Google. Well, no, one went to North Korea, but that one never made it. But nonetheless, it was incredibly interesting to see that those things are highly effective. And if Russians have iPhones, which we know they do, the AirTags would work on these vehicles. And so I think that would be something incredibly beneficial to do, to make sure that the Ukrainians could keep track of these vehicles if they ever fell back into Russian hands. So I do agree. I think that would be an incredibly good implementation of modern technology, something that doesn't really seem like it's been tapped yet in terms of its potential, but I hope that it will soon in the future. So I thank you very much for the support and the very interesting suggestion. And with that being said, we're going to move on to the next question.
And up next, we have an $8 donation from Duncan VR, who says, news alert, Ukrainian farmer tows Russian sub from Black Sea, LOL, weekly Leaf Spring Pizza Fund money. Don't forget to add pineapple.
Well, I thank you very much for the support, and I know that a lot of people also get militant about pineapple on pizza. Honestly, I don't eat it a lot, but I'm not against it either. It's just kind of a thing. It's another flavor. You know, the sweetness of the pineapple contradicts the saltiness of the pizza. That's kind of like the whole intention of it. But then again, you know, I don't really have an opinion on it. It's okay, but it's not terrible. But nonetheless, thank you so much for the support. And what's weird enough, Matthew can actually back this up. We actually got pizza tonight, and I'm a huge fan of pizza. I love pizza. So we got we got Papa John's, of course. You know, it was what was it? Peppercini? No, it was the Mediterranean pizza, I think, or something with the peppers on it. And then we got the paper thin crust pepperoni, and then we got a normal pepperoni. I love them all, honestly. I think pizza's wonderful. So I thank you so much for the support and also supporting the Pizza Fund. And I do like that you enjoy the channel's content. It does make me very happy to know that a lot of people do like it. So I thank you once again. And with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And up next, we have an $8 donation from Wojtek YVR, who says, why are Putin's ratings going up every time he starts a new war? What kind of population are the Russians?
I don't know what kind of population the Russians are, but once again, you've got to realize that in Russia, where the country is pretty much an authoritarian-led nation, that the polls could be skewed. Although I don't think that is the case, because we hardly see any videos of protests anymore, and everything we see coming out of Russia is people talking about, oh, I'm entirely in support of the war. Of course, that may be a Russian initiative to make it look like, you see, the West can't do anything to shake our moral foundations. Everyone's in line with what the government says. That could be that. But at the same time, it's very interesting to me that that is what we're seeing, and it may actually be true that his approval ratings are going up. And so if that is the case, I think the Russians are just a messed up group of people. You know, if they, excuse me, their approval ratings go up every single time they go to war. That's very weird to me. But anyways, I hope I've addressed that question fairly well. There's not really, it's kind of like a subjective thing, so I can't really comment too much on it, but I hope that does give an answer in a way. So I thank you very much for the support, and I thank you very much for helping us to continue to run this channel. And with that being said, we're going to move on to the next question.
And I'm not sure what to think of this next one, but I'm going to read it off anyway. They put in a $5 donation, and it's from Digivagrant, who says, what does a live streamer have to do to piss off the Azov and be captured and tortured?
I don't know. I've never heard about that. So I don't know. I mean, like, to piss off the Azov and be captured and tortured, I don't know. I mean, like, maybe give away their positions on YouTube. You know, I would assume that would be something that probably gets you captured and tortured, but nonetheless, I thank you very much for the support. I don't really know what that's talking about, and so with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And up next, we have a $5 donation from Victor's Laboratory, who says, 100% right. I was 11B for 4 years in the Army and was an E4 when I got out. I'm no military expert beyond small unit tactics.
And I thank you very much for the support, and I thank you very much for agreeing with me, because that's something I see a lot of people saying, you know, and I'm not going to call out other YouTubers because I don't like causing beef, and there's no reason for it. But there's a lot of YouTubers out there that people give credibility, and they're like, oh, you know, he knows a lot more than the enforcer is, the big picture, how things are happening. And it's just because they have prior military experience. But when you hear about it, they were in the military on like a 4-year contract. They probably got out as like an E4, you know, specialist. That E4 mafia everyone talks about. And, and you know, they sit there and act like these guys who were on the low level end of things. They probably didn't. They have, listen, an E4, like you know, because you've sent in the super chat. An E4 has no idea what's going on in the big picture. Moscow Mike came on, and as far as I know, I think he got up to E3 in Germany, and y'all didn't like what he's saying, and he didn't have a clue what was going on, and he was in the army, and that kind of gives you the idea that just because someone has prior military experience, it doesn't mean that they're going to be an absolute killer, like, analyst or anything, you know, because because especially, let me make this clear, it's not all of them. Officers will definitely have a much higher degree of competence and intelligence when talking about the big scheme of things, the larger picture. But when you're talking about, like, the grunts have a good idea, about as good of an idea of what's going on as I do. That's why, you know, at the beginning of this whole entire thing, we actually heard that a lot of Ukrainians and Ukrainian units were actually tuning into this stream and watching it, because we had about as good of an idea of what was going on as the grunts did. Well, actually, even better, because most of the things I said actually turned out to be true. But nonetheless, I feel like there's kind of like that qualification hurdle there where everyone's like, oh, you haven't served, so you don't know. But, like, honestly, you know, I'm not going to know the nit and grit about how to shine a shoe or how to make it the bed, the Army style, you know, the Marine Corps style. But nonetheless, you don't have to know those things to know a big picture thing, like doing the numbers and seeing if the logistical units can support the infantry, or what looks like a smart thing to do. Like this right here, this little yellow line that I said the Russians will probably try and push, was obvious to me. I don't have any military experience, and you don't need military experience when you have a history degree and you can see things as obvious as this and be like, well, historically, bulges like that are always exploited by the enemy because it's a weak spot. You know, you don't have to, you know, be a general or an officer or even have any kind of military experience to see that kind of stuff. And that's really what the stream is about. It's more about the big strategical picture that someone can really just talk about with no experience, more so than nitty-gritty things like the exact specifications in the operations of a Javelin ATGM or a T-72B3 or a T-90. Like that's superficial knowledge. You don't really need to know that type of information about the variance between vehicle to vehicle and such. But I thank you so much for the support, and I'm glad that you do agree with me, that just because someone has military experience doesn't mean they're going to have like an overarching view of how this entire war is going to turn out. So I thank you very much for the support once again, and with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And up next, we have a $5 donation from Frostbright Productions, who says, "Much love to you, Enforcer Gang. Could you offer an option to those who purchase merch, can share a photo/video to you, maybe even show it live?"
There is a good way. You can go to the Discord. Now, I don't really highly suggest this because I get bombarded with DMs every day, and I want to answer all of them, and I try to, but because there's so many of them, and I'm trying to go through them as fast as possible, most of the time I can't check out anything anyone's sending, and I just have to send back things like I'll try and check it out, but I never get around to it because, like I'm telling you, I have no time. So before, like, you could send them there. You know, you can join the Discord server, and I'm in there, and you can DM me from there. But the chances of me being able to look at something is actually pretty low. Sadly, I hate to say that, but there's just so many DMs, and I try and answer them all that there's just no time. But I thank you very much for the support, and that is the best way to reach me and show me things. So thank you once again, and with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And next up, we have a $5 donation from Diffuse56, who says, "What's your favorite scene from the Ukrainian national anthem? Mine is when the tank blows up."
Let's see. My favorite scene from the Ukrainian national anthem, the intro one in this video at least, is that one shot when the aircraft gets blown up above the clouds and you can actually see like the flash of the explosion. I think that is the most beautiful war footage that I've seen. And also the clip immediately succeeding that, where you can see the kind of like remains of the aircraft falling to the ground, and it's just a giant burning like cloud of embers. And I think those two are my most favorite part of the intro song. So I hope that answers the question, and I thank you so much for the support. And with that being said, we're going to move on to the next one.
And next up, we have a $5 donation from That Frost Wolf, who says, "Yippee, look, these Z's are doing their job. The battlefield is in a shape of a crescent moon, putting everyone to sleep and themselves. Ricola, anyone?"
Well, I thank you very much for the support. And yeah, it's kind of in the shape of a C. So I can't wait to see if the Ukrainians can shape this thing into nothing, you know, because I would hope to see this front line shrinking in the future instead of growing. So I thank you very much for the support, and also the little joke. I like that right there. So with that being said, we're going to move on to the next question.
And up next, we have a $5 donation from Jonathan White, who says, "The families of those lost on the Kursk and Moskva should come together and have their voices heard and demand answers against the lies that they were told."
I can entirely agree, but the thing with the Russians is that we saw in the Kursk disaster, they will do everything to skirt around accepting accountability and responsibility for the loss of sailors in an unfortunate incident. Well, the Kursk disaster, I've actually watched a couple of documentaries on that. It was a very interesting disaster in its own right. But the Russians never really stepped up to the plate and said, yep, that happened because of our incompetence and also low budgeting. And so they all died for no reason. We're sorry. And they never said that. They just kind of tried to skirt by it and ignore it and be like, hey, you know, it didn't really happen. You know, they've been reassigned, you know, stuff like that, until they finally had to say, well, it sank, but it wasn't our fault. So I thank you very much for the support. And I can agree. I think that would be nice for them to all gather and try and have their voices be heard. But at this point, I think the Russians would just arrest them all and call them traitors, considering that they're in the middle of a war, and they'll probably treat them harshly. But I thank you very much for the support nonetheless, and I do agree with you. And so with that being said, we're going to move on to the next question.
And up next, we have a $5 donation from William Allen again. He says, "I noticed they have an RQ-11 Raven to use as a recon aircraft. Would that be possibly an EF-111 Raven given by the U.S.?"
Let's see. EF-111 Raven. Huh, this is just an aardvark. They were retired in 1998. Only 42 of them were built. And I'm sure that most of them have probably been scrapped at this point, or they're beyond repair. Probably sitting somewhere in the desert waiting to be demolished. So, unfortunately, I cannot answer that question because I don't think there's any of these to even be given anymore, if that's what the question was asking. So sadly, I don't think that'd be a possibility for him if I was to answer it, because it looks like these aircraft have been out of service for so long, nearly 24 years at this point. I'm very sure that nothing of them exists anymore. But I thank you so much for the support, and sadly, it doesn't really look like they'll be able to get an EF-111 Raven anyways, but I do thank you for the question nonetheless. Also, neat little picture. I like the Aardvark as a design. It was a very cool design plane. It's also cool to see it in some kind of electronic warfare variant. But anyways, thank you very much. Sorry I couldn't really answer that question too well, but with that, we're going to move on to the next one.
And up next, we have a $5 donation from Chad Freeze, who says, do you think the Ukrainians could pull off a Doolittle type raid and bomb Moscow in a special mission? And will they try it?
Ooh, that's a tough one. You see, they don't have any strategic bombers. Let's pull up the range of Su-27, and then we'll pull up MiG-29. The Su-27 has a range of 2,193 miles. So let's see, from a reasonable airbase, which is probably around Kyiv at this point if they've gotten any of those back up. The range to Moscow is around 500 miles, so it's completely doable. They can actually do a return trip, fly there, and then fly back. So, I mean, maybe. I mean, I don't think they would want to, though. I feel like most of those aircraft would be shot down by air defenses on the way there, and of course, Moscow does have an air defense perimeter, which would probably shoot down most of the aircraft once they got there. And of course, the Ukrainian Air Force isn't large. Most of it has been destroyed at this point, so I don't even think they'd have a sizable number of aircraft to even conduct a meaningful raid on Moscow with. But I thank you very much for the question, and I hope that does answer it in a way. And so with that, we're going to move on to the next one.
And up next, we have another $5 donation from That Frost Wolf, who says, one Ruski burglar came flapping down with a large cockadruple-sized bras and asked a very important question, is the Satan ICBM capable of being used?
Let's pull that up. Satan ICBM. Let's see here. Let's just look at this in general. The R-36. Apparently that is the Satan. We also saw James May try and light one of these up on Top Gear, didn't we, Matthew?
Yeah, he tried.
Yeah. There it is. That's actually the one. This is the one at the museum. He was standing right back here with a lighter, and he was trying to light it, and he said, I don't think it's working. I loved the Top Gear group. They were incredibly good. And also then they went on to do the Grand Tour, which was incredibly good. But I think they've even stopped doing that now. But let's see. Apparently there's a lot of variants of it. Maybe we can get number of warheads. So they have 10 R36M UTTKH MUT-KH. They have 10 R36M2s, one R36M2 with an RS-20V treaty designation. So it looks like they have 28, 29. They have 31 of them. Let's see, 46 silo-based missiles are deployed. Well, what's this about? Huh, okay, interesting. Apparently that graph is for something else. Apparently just the R36M variants, and not any of the other ones. But nonetheless, it looks like they have 46 of them, and I don't know if they would be usable. Once again, the Russian military budget is incredibly low, so it's a question if any of these missiles are operable or how many of them are. So I thank you very much for the question. I hope that does answer it in a way, but unfortunately, I'm not really one to be with the strategic missile troops to know how to answer that question for them. So I'm just going to leave that there. Take that as a grain of salt. That was all found trying to get public information for it. So with that, we're now going to move on to the next question.
And up next is a $5 donation from Lilith Embers, who says, when you first heard the Ukrainian national anthem, did anyone else think of the guy on the cart in Monty Python saying he wasn't dead yet?
No, I didn't. I know what you're talking about, but I didn't think of that. Actually, I think the one we've got on the intro is actually like one of the most patriotic and most proud sounding ones that I can find on the internet. I hate sad, sappy sounding songs, especially when they're associated with a government or a military or something, because you always got that one song, you know it like the back of your hand, where you got that one girl and she's singing the song as a solo, really slow and solemn. I don't like that. I think the anthems and patriotic music ought to be strong, powerful, and stir up some pride in people instead of like some solemn sadness. I don't think that really mixes with patriotic music well, or national anthems. But I do thank you for the question. Unfortunately, I really can't answer that one too well because I didn't actually think of that when I heard the beginning of the anthem, but maybe other people did. So I thank you very much for the support, and with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And up next, we have a $5 donation from William Henry, who says, been watching you since the war started and love your work. Where do you think Russia goes next if their push in Donbas fails? All the best from New Zealand.
Well, thank you very much for the support, and it is good to hear that we do have viewers from around the world, like we were saying earlier. To answer that question, I don't think the Russians have anywhere to go if the Donbass fails. They can't go back into the north because they've already failed there, and they will fail again. You know, if they fail in the Donbass, which is, excuse me, a much shorter front line than it once was, including the north, the entire east, and the south, that tells you that no matter how the Russians juggle their force numbers and try and put them into certain areas and try and funnel them through certain places to get certain results, it's just never going to happen. So I think at that point the Russians would just have to admit some kind of loss in the offensive war and try and peace out some way, because there would never be a way for them to win it. They would just be stuck on the border at that point trying to make meaningful ground, which would never occur. So I thank you very much for the support. I hope that does answer the question, at least in brief. And with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And up next is a $5 donation from Alex Ambrose, who says, I love Offesnive.
I love Offesnive as well. I think it's a really fun little city building game. Make sure to go check that out, everyone, and get it. If you want a relaxing little game to play, and if you want to support a Ukrainian game developer. I also saw someone talk about the game Cossacks, and I do have that game. I actually bought that one, Cossacks 3, a long time ago, and I played it, but it's honestly, it's not really my style, but I know it's a lot of people's styles because it's one of the most heavily played kind of like top-down strategy games there is. So I hope that a lot of people do go and take a look at that because it is neat. And it is a cool game, and of course it does come from a Ukrainian company. There's also a whole bunch of others like Stalker, Shadow of Chernobyl, well, really the whole Stalker series. A lot of stuff comes out of Ukraine, video game wise, that's really interesting and very neat. It does reflect Ukrainian culture in a very cool way. So I thank you very much for the support, and also bringing that one, bringing Offesnive up as well, because I do like that game. It's pretty cool. And so with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And up next is a $4 donation from the Trolling Bastard, who says, hi, sir, here's some money I can't afford to spend, so I can ask this question. Do you have a rough estimate on both sides' casualties? Slava Ukraine.
Yes, we do. Right now, we know that the Russians have lost over 20,000 troops. That number may be rounding up around 21,000, 22,000 at this point. And last we heard from Zelensky, which was just a few days ago, the Ukrainians, according to the Ukrainian figures, have lost 3,000 troops. So those are the current figures we've got right now, and I hope that does answer the question, and it's totally fine. I mean, like, really honestly, I suggest that everyone goes and supports charities and stuff before they come support the channel, because while it is important for us to get support from our viewers to keep going, because that's the only way we can generate income to make sure that everything stays alive, it is, of course, important to help out Ukraine as well. But I thank you so much for the question, and I hope that does answer it. And so with that, how many super chats do we have left, Matthew?
So we have 4 comments left, and then we have a couple of donations we need to recognize.
All right, and so with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And up next is a $4 donation from J.M. Pickering, who says, hi from Australia. I love what you do and keeping it real. Much appreciated, and Slava Ukraine.
Slava Ukraine. And yes, I do thank you very much for the support, and I'm glad that you do enjoy it and like it a lot, because it does take a lot of work to put this together. I was actually, when I was talking about that interview with that new mod we got on the Discord server, I don't want to say his name again, but I was actually telling him about how much work it was taking, because I was actually telling him hours before the stream, hey, I've got to go because I've got to work on this thing, and it takes the whole entire time to work on it. I got to go make the thumbnail. I've got to go put together the actual news. I've got to do a lot of searching for it. And so I do thank you very much for appreciating the effort I go through. So thank you once again. And also, by the way, to mention to everyone, this is a custom-made map. This isn't dragged off of anywhere else on the internet like a lot of other people do. I make sure to go through and adjust the front lines myself if there's ever any changes, and I also add all of the markers on this map on my own. So I thank you all very much once again, and with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And the next one is a $2 donation from Wapalong Cassidy, who says, nobody knows equipment like you.
I think there's a lot of people who do know equipment better than me. That's one area I will say I have absolutely no knowledge in, really, is the equipment. I can identify certain different kinds of vehicles, but I can't tell you about all their specific, gun types, their optics, what they're called, their range, how far the gun can shoot on the tank. I can't really say any of that, but I can identify them very well. But I thank you very much for the high praise, and I thank you so much for the support. And with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And up next is a $2 donation from Rob Scott, who says, let's start a cycle helmets for troops, Russian.
Well, I thank you very much for the support, and that does sound like an interesting idea that we will have to look into in the future. So I thank you very much for the support, and with that being said, we're going to move on to the next question.
And the last super chat of the night before we recognize some donations is from Josh Dean, who says, when do you think Antarctica will join the war?
I think that it's just a matter of time away. The Penguins are still amassing and mobilizing down there, but I think as soon as they get done mobilizing, they will declare war on the Russians very soon. So I thank you very much for the support and the little joke question there. I liked it. It's pretty good. And so with that, we're now going to recognize our donors, and then we're going to get to 3 questions from the live chat. And so with that, who are the people who donated without a comment?
Okay, so we have a $5 donation from Alex Ambrose again, a $5 donation from Fat Daddy, and then we have a $5 donation from Armor the First and a $10 donation from Armor the First. Thank you very much to all of you for all of your donations. And if there were any super chats that came in with comments, unfortunately, we're not going to be able to read them because we are running very, very late on the stream, and we have to get to our live chat questions. So whenever you're ready, Enforcer, I have those queued up.
All right, and let's get to them.
Okay, so the first one is from longtime channel supporter Vicious Tuna, who says, Enforcer, do you think arms and supplies coming to Ukraine will encounter similar logistical issues as the Russians? Slava Ukraine.
Slava Ukraini. And to answer that question, I'm not really sure. I think most of the railheads are, of course, intact behind the lines, which the Ukrainians also rely heavily on railheads being operational and functional, much like the Russians. But not as much as the Russians. I don't think they have railroad logistical brigades or anything like that. But I think the railroads are intact. The roads are mostly intact. And I believe that as long as they have enough trucks and enough trains to carry the cargo, it will get to its locations promptly. We haven't ever heard of the Ukrainians running through supply shortages anywhere. Even in Mariupol, it's really hard to hear any information about them having supply shortages, although we do know that they are suffering massive supply shortages down there just because the siege has been going on for 50 days, and it only makes reasonable sense that they would be running out of supplies at this point. So to answer that question to this most vicious tuna, I think that they may be able to face those logistical issues, but we don't really have a lot of info on Ukrainian logistics to tell if they are. So I thank you very much for the question. I hope that does answer it, and we're going to move on to the next one.
And the next one is from Heather Hartzell, who says, I have a question. Does anyone know what happened with Zelensky's offer to exchange prisoners of war for evacuation for civilians?
I have never heard about that offer, and so unfortunately, I really can't comment on it. So I'm going to actually have to plead ignorance on that one and move on to the next question.
And do you want to take 2 more questions?
Yes, we'll take 2 in response to the quick one.
Okay, so the next one is from Freedom First, who says, how long do you think it'll take for Ukraine to rebuild from the war?
Oh, that's a tough question. It depends on how much external aid they get doing it. If they get no aid, it's going to take ages. If they get a lot of help from the outside, mostly Western countries like the United States funneling in money into the reconstruction, I would say it would probably take around 3 years at most and around a year and a half at best for most of the country to be kind of on a good standard, if you know what I'm saying there. But then again, it could take a long time. Like places like South London never really recovered after the Blitz and the bombings after the war. A lot of the south of London just has massive areas that are empty that used to be, actual urban city blocks, but they were entirely level during the Blitz, the subsequent V1 and V2 bombings, and then they were never rebuilt. So I don't really know. But I would say that on an optimistic timetable, it would be somewhere in between a year and a half or 3 years until a large majority of the country was rebuilt. Then again, I'm not really an expert on how long a reconstruction like that would take. We know with the Marshall Plan, once the Marshall Plan set in West Germany, it was only a matter of a few years, really, until the whole entire country had been brought back up to speed. So I thank you very much for the question. It is a very interesting one, and I hope it does answer it at least in a way. And so with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And the next question is from Jay Tremblay, who says, Enforcer, are there any current reports on any of the American foreign fighters within Ukraine?
There aren't really any more reports coming out about them right now. I don't know if that's because they're being held in reserve and nothing's really going on with them to show. Because we do know the last time we saw them, they were up in the northern front near Kyiv. They were getting a little bit of publicity, and we had Call of Duty actor sounding guy Rodriguez, I think his name was, who was saying a lot about what the Americans were doing. But then we haven't really heard much about them since the northern front. So I don't know if they've been moved down to the southern or eastern fronts yet. So unfortunately, we don't have any information that has come out recently about what they've been doing down there. So I hope that answers the question. And with that, we have a record here. This has got to be the longest stream I've ever done. It's now 3 hours and 2 minutes long. This is now longer than a Forrest Gump movie, and somehow we do this nearly nightly. So I thank you all so much for coming. I hope I've answered everyone's questions really well, and I hope you all have heard a lot of news that you haven't heard anywhere else today. And so I thank you all so much. If you're new to the stream and you've watched all the way through the questions, I've got to credit you for having a lot of stamina. And make sure to subscribe if you've enjoyed it. It does help out the channel a lot. And make sure to like as well. It looks like we're at 2,638 likes. And so if everyone in this comment section, well, actually watching this video right now, hit that thumbs up, that would help out this video a load in reaching other people, and also this channel as a whole, and making sure that people, excuse me, who are out there wanting to hear the news don't go without hearing it from here. And so I thank you all so much once again for watching. It has been a pleasure reporting the news to y'all tonight. And I, of course, will see y'all again tomorrow at 10 p.m. Eastern Time to talk about Day 57's news. So thank you all once again, and I'll see y'all all around. Good night, and take care.